I hate this side of the badge. Cops admit the rules they think are totally wrong. The cops in my town carry nickels and feed the meters instead of taking the time to write tickets. The cops in my town hide behind the corners and wait for the meter to run out so they can sprint to your car and slam a ticket on it. Before I was a police officer, I was put in a sort of catch-all position, police service officer. Duties included evidence, custodian, animal control, court bailiff, code enforcement, and part-time police work. This is 2012-2013. Kansas had rather a wet season. For about a month and a half straight, we had rain almost every day. Nobody had the chance to mow their grass. The city manager saw it as a grand opportunity for me to start writing people tickets for their grass being too high. I told him I didn't feel comfortable doing that. When asked why, I told him I didn't think it was right for me to write tickets for tall grass when there were city-owned properties all over the city that had grass just as tall. We went back and forth. He got my captain involved and threw a fit. Before he stomped out of the captain's office, he made the comment, "This is my city, you work for me, and what I say is law." The captain agreed that he was a butthole, but ultimately said I should just write the tickets. So I went back to the evidence locker, what everyone called my business because I was the only one who had access, and I did some research. An hour later, I walked over to the city manager's office, which happened to be right across the street from me, and I handed him about 14 tickets. He asked what those were for. I told him I was doing exactly what he told me to do. I was writing tickets for grass being too tall. The first 14 tickets were for the 14 city-owned properties that had grass over 12 inches high. He said those weren't his responsibility. I calmly reminded him of his previous comment about him owning the city, and he called the chief. He insisted I be fired for insubordination. A month later, I was promoted to full-time patrol officer. This happened 7 or 8 years ago. I was eventually fired for reasons I won't get into. All I will say is I obviously wasn't going to be the type of police officer they wanted me to be, so they made an example out of me. I worked for a city station in Australia that fully expected that we'd give tickets to people for being homeless or begging for money. These tickets were $600 a pop at least. I pretty much refused to give them out because it felt barbaric. Like homeless people didn't already have it rough enough without getting a $600 ticket, which if they didn't pay, they'd turn into a court case and warrant. How are they going to pay it anyway? The only point to it seemed to be to kick them while they were down. Plus, begging for money is a summary offence here. Not an indictable offence, and we have some discretion for summary offences, meaning the superior officers wanted us to be absolute C-words for the sake of it. I was in charge of training new recruits at the time, and I thought it was better to demonstrate compassion to them and teach them what services were available to the homeless, and when, how to get them fast-tracked into emergency housing, and what places would offer free food. I transitioned out of that station because I was getting tired of getting crap for not giving people crap. Yeah, I mean, honestly, those tickets are just going to cause someone else to spiral even further into the situation they're in, regardless of how they got there. What's the logical conclusion to finding people with no money who have nowhere else to go? Prison and indentured servitude? What kind of world are we trying to build here? I was an Air Force cop. Hated taking cell phones from people from the flight line. Flight line is where the jets sit, they're worked on, and they launch out of their parking spots, if you want to call them that. It's surrounded by a red line that you aren't allowed to cross unless you have a special badge and security clearance. You're not supposed to have your phone because you can't take pictures of the flight line in case an enemy gets a hold of them and learns where they're kept and what buildings to attack. It's an arrestable offense and you could lose ranks and stuff. Every single cop has their phone on them on the flight line, I can guarantee it. I was working security for a low-income housing facility. The people that ran this place had a little scam they did where they'd turn off the fobs of tenants, so tenants couldn't open the front door. It was $35 to get the fob turned back on. There were 400 tenants at the complex. At any one time, a quarter of the fobs might be turned off. I was working the front desk, and if a tenant had turned off a fob, I wasn't supposed to let them in. I'd let them in anyway, and I got fired. Oh, and another thing they did, since most of the tenants didn't have bank accounts and paid with money orders, management would lose 3 or 4 months' worth of money orders. Then they'd give the tenant an eviction notice for failure to pay rent. If the tenants had the receipts and paperwork, management would suddenly, miraculously find the money orders, let the tenant stay, but still charge tenant a few months of late fees. Holy crap, I totally understand wanting to just leave this behind you, but the crap you're describing is getting pretty atrocious, and this is just from what you know. Please try to at least make an effort to do the right thing. Hit back on the internet if things turn sour. There's a fair amount of actual lawyers who may provide assistance if it comes to it. Godspeed, sir. Most town and city ordinances. Things like not being able to park on the street in front of your house between certain hours of the night. Screw that. You want me to ticket some dad's car because he moved it out of the driveway so his 5-year-old son could bike around the driveway? Yeah, that's not happening. Also, certain traffic violations in the middle of the night. You forgot to signal your merge when you're the only vehicle on a 2-lane road at 3 a.m.? Well, God help us all. Recently expired driving licenses and plates. A neighboring city wrote a car whose plates expired 11 minutes prior. Cue bewildered Jacksonville Jaguars fan gif. The cop said the person should have known it was about to expire and taken care of it ahead of time. Oh, fudge right off. We've all had life interfere with things. There's a huge difference between letter of the law and spirit of the law. I'd say that I'm probably just a terrible cop, but my coffee mug says I'm the world's best policeman, so it's definitely not that. I'm not a police officer, but I work in environmental regulation and enforcement, and I have powers of constabulary, UK-based. There are pretty much 4 types of people I deal with. First is the business owners who treat regulations and the law like a game. Sometimes you can get away with flouting it and save or make yourself a little bit of money. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but it's not personal. Then there's the people who go out to flout the law because investigating environmental crime is relatively under-resourced and it's a good way to launder money. Third is the farmers who are too tight or skint to pay to ensure their farm infrastructure doesn't kill an entire river. And finally, we have the homeowners who are simply having a crap day and something goes wrong like an oil leak or their septic systems break down. Types 1, 2, and 3 are absolutely fair game to go after. You own a business? It's your responsibility to make sure you stick to the law. Type 4 though? Okay, technically, yeah, you've just discharged 1,000 liters of oil from your oil tank into a river. But let's be honest, that's in no one's interests. Why on earth would I hammer someone like that for technically breaking the law when they've already got enough headache of replacing that oil, remediating the land, replacing the tank, yada yada. Yeah, we'll recover our costs because that's fair, but I'm not about to throw the book at someone for being unlucky. I had a very brief stint as a deputy sheriff a handful of years ago. I struggled a lot with situations in which addicts were criminalized. There was one man who I remember who had been out on patrol but got caught with substances in his system. Because of the failed test, he was getting sent back to jail, and unfortunately I was the one who had to take him there. It crushed me. It was an older guy who clearly didn't mean to cause trouble and clearly didn't want to be in the situation. He needed treatment, not jail time. We also had a lot of people come through who were using synthetic stuff, like bath salts when nobody knew what they were, and Bath & Body Works took their bath salts off the shelves. It was frightening to see some of our frequent flyers come back to us more and more incoherent because of these and the permanent damage they were causing. But the truly heartbreaking moment was when I was transporting a young black man who was in for many Mary J. possessions, and he said, "The next time I'm using that synthetic crap, your tests can't see that in my system." I went full-on mama bear and I told him, basically begged him, not to mess with that stuff, and I relayed some of the things I'd seen. I have no way of knowing if he ever listened to me, but I really, really hope he did. Ultimately, my experience in this job changed my intended career path. I'd been planning on staying in law enforcement for a chunk of time and then going to law school. I even had judges ready to write recommendation letters and a solid LSAT practice test score. But to see so many stupid and morally debased laws being upheld simply because that was the precedent didn't sit well with me. So I left that job and became a documentary filmmaker instead. Much less lucrative, but a more immediate way to work for justice. I suppose spreading awareness is probably the important first step in combating addiction. If the current line is just to lock them up, fine them, and drive them into the arms of these other more harmful substances, it's a respectful choice. I hope it's all going well. My best bud, I've known him for 20 years, and his entire family are all cops. Dad, mum, sister, and 2 brothers, all cops. Anyway, I have dinner with them from time to time, and I recall one time his brother was discussing having to go to monitor a protest with all the other cops in their riot gear. I was fascinated that every cop at the table had the same reaction of hating protests for different reasons. One person said it was boring and you have to stand all day. Another said it sucks when the people you're protecting start yelling at you. And his mum, who was a dispatcher, said it diminishes responsibility because all the cops were tied up at the protest and that means less patrols elsewhere. Bottom line is, I found out that cops hate protesters. This is true. I worked a few rallies for folks who we'll call modern Third Reich enthusiasts back in the late 70s. Think the Blues Brothers movie. These guys hated the cops, and the crowd hated them, and we were in a formation in between the two. The protesters would throw things at these scumbags like eggs, tomatoes, and M80s. Trouble is, most people can't throw for crap, and we'd get pelted with this stuff or have an M80 blow up right next to us. Protests suck big time. A buddy of mine used to be a cop, and he said he never got anyone for green herb because it's too much hassle and it'll be legal soon anyway. What do you mean the suspect had 5 kilos of grass? I only saw 4. Wow, these criminals are really out here with only 3 kilos of Mary J? All that paperwork just to enter these 2 kilos of green herb into evidence. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? You know, I've had a few good experiences with reasonable cops over the years. One time I was rolling into a small town in western New York in a snowstorm, and I had a radar detector on the dash. I see a cop coming the other way and whoop! I look down and I'm going 32 in a 25 zone. I look in the mirror and he flips around and I just pulled over and waited for him to catch up. He gets out and says, "You're going a little fast back there. Why do you pull over?" I said, "Roads are slick. Didn't want you to have to catch up to me." He goes back and runs my plate, comes back and shoots the breeze with me for a couple of minutes and says, "You have a good day. Get out of the snow." A friend of mine's a cop in a small town in western New York. He's told me before how much he hates having to chase people. And people who know they're the reason the cop put his lights on and just pull over right away are much less likely to get a ticket. I had a run-in with the cops a few years ago where they could have easily taken me for at the very least public intoxication, but they cut me a break and gave me a ride home instead. Made me feel like they didn't want to take some drunk idiot to jail when he was just trying to get home and sleep. I'd taken a cab back from a work party and I was pretty drunk. My friend and I had just moved into this new apartment, so I accidentally gave the cab driver the wrong address. I ended up on a block that looked very similar to mine and a building that looked exactly like mine. There were 2 doors before getting to my apartment door, which was on the first floor. Like my apartment building, they left the first door unlocked and locked the second door. I kept trying my keys to open it, but I couldn't, and I was confused. I went outside to look for my car, and it wasn't parked there. That's when I realized I was on the wrong block. I started walking in the direction I thought my apartment was when a cop car pulls up. They ask me what I'm doing, and I tell them, "I'm really drunk and I just want to go home," which was the honest truth. They told me they got a call about someone trying to get into an apartment building. I guess the people in that building woke up and thought I was trying to break in. They were super suspicious of me at first, but eventually it became clear that I was just some drunk idiot and not a burglar. They ran me through to make sure I didn't have warrants or anything, and when I checked out, they offered me a ride home. The ride back was hilarious because when we were getting to my apartment, I tried telling them that it was a bit complicated to get to because of all the one-way streets. The officer driving was like, "Who do you think you're with?" and then turned on the lights and went the wrong way down the street to get me home faster. It honestly felt like I was with the 2 cops from Superbad. This took place in Canada. When an alcoholic is placed on conditions not to consume alcohol, it feels like a real jerk move to charge them with breaching conditions if the only offense they're committing is the consumption breach. On the other hand, it makes for a great additional charge you can slap on buttholes who are, for example, beating their spouses while drunk. My dad is an officer, and in my state, the police and state patrol officers do not have a minimum quota for tickets they have to write. In fact, it's illegal here for a superior officer to tell the lower-ranking officers to write X amount of tickets. This has a point, I promise. So a while ago, one of my dad's co-workers was being told by a superior officer, "You're not writing enough tickets. You need to write more of them." The officer replied, "Yes, sir," and wrote the superior officer a ticket for telling him to write more tickets. It's the best story I've ever heard from my dad about his job. I know it sounds like the most fake thing in the world, but I swear it's true. Yep, incentivizing cops to prioritize the money-making practices above the ones that save lives is not the way to go. I wonder if even though your beat cop dad didn't have any such directive, his superior did have some such goal from above. One of my friends was a military police officer, and a majority of his domestic disputes were because of the wives. But he was always forced to remove the male spouse or the service member spouse in the instance of gay couples, or remove the higher-ranked spouse if both were in the service. The case that really made him want to quit being an MP was our mutual friend had a domestic disturbance called to his house, and his wife, who everyone who'd ever met her knew she was a straight-up B-word and hated everyone. Well, she had started arguing with her husband, and that had led to her throwing stuff, anything in arm's reach, at him. He started to record this, and he was still charged with domestic violence even though he'd never hit her or anything. And he had to spend 24 hours locked up in a ward in the hospital because he needed almost 30 stitches total and had a pretty bad concussion. Both friends have since left the military. The one with the DV charge has been divorced from his ex, thank God. He also got the charges thrown out because of the video footage. My friend, the military police, is now a social worker for domestic attack survivors. He assists in how to obtain protective orders, emergency housing, and even name changes. I'm a 911 call taker. Any kind of petty, non-emergency call where someone isn't directly bothering anyone is the most obnoxious kind of call you have to put in for us. If you call in to report teenagers skating, people smoking green herb, or a party going on at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday, there's almost a 90% chance at least one person is insulting you on the other end of the phone for it. If it's not us, it's the dispatchers or the police themselves. Riding bikes on empty pavements. If there's pedestrians on it, then yeah, sure, use the road. But if it's completely empty, why not use it? It's a lot safer than riding on the road. I've never arrested anyone for green herb possession, nor would I unless forced to. I've never been faced with it, but as long as it isn't in everyone's face, I'd never charge working girls either. You never know why they've had to resort to that line of work. I'm not a cop, but my dad is. We recently had a whole discussion about mandatory arrest laws, where if two people got into an argument where someone was hurt and had a prior relationship, cousins, ex-boyfriends or girlfriends, the officer has to arrest someone. This stemmed from a long history of men whacking their spouses, the spouses calling the police and the men saying that everything was cool, and smoothing it over with a popo. And these laws we've mentioned work great in domestic situations because cops would tend to side with the man, but not great in other situations. Where my dad disagrees is in these other situations. Say you and your boys are out downtown for a night of drinking and games when you beat one of your friends in a game of darts. Your friend gets upset that you beat him and starts yelling. You yell back, of course, and your friend hits you. The bartender calls the cops and gets you bread and water, and you and your friend sober up. By the time the cops get there, your friend and you have kissed and made up, and everything is good between you. However, because the two of you are friends, the police must arrest someone by law. With these laws, a little argument over darts turns into a night in jail and a criminal record. And it gets worse. Because your friend and you have a prior relationship, this misdemeanor turns into a felony aggravated assault, and you're now a convicted felon. Lots of college-age boys have had their lives ruined by these laws, and for this reason, my dad disagrees. I refuse to enforce speeding under 15 miles per hour unless it's a school zone with kids visible. 5-mile-per-hour tickets make me sick. I also, as long as they're being cool with me, do not like to enforce suspension for non-payment when I'm stopping them on their way to work. Why punish someone with a fine and tow fees when they're actively doing something to fix the problem? To this date, I have yet to write for a headlight or rear light being out. 3+ months minimum for expired plates, but even then, as long as they're cool, it's just a warning or courtesy notice, since the state will fine them anyways. A fine from me and the state is just excessive, in my opinion. Noise and curfew types of ordinances, given the situation. Example, if you're called for a loud noise at a park, 10 p.m. and it ends up being the teens playing a very competitive volleyball game. Technically the park is closed and they are violating noise ordinances, however, they're sober, as far as I can tell, and just having a genuinely good time. Long story short, I drive into the park and pull up on the side and get out of my car. Not a sound from anyone, and they all freeze and stare at me until I said, "I thought you could use some more light," and I activated my floodlight so they could see better. I stayed there and wrote my reports for an hour. The people who called about them suck. Teenagers not out partying or doing other things that could endanger themselves or others is a great thing. There's more, but those are the ones that come to mind first. As a guy who used to stay next to a park where people would just noisily play volleyball from 4 p.m. through midnight every summer night, I must admit I feel some aggression to noisy gatherings of that exact sort, but I guess on balance I don't think kids should be arrested or booked for something that's way better than doing substances or booze at parties. In the grand internet tradition of not quite answering the question right, I dated a girl whose father was a cop. He'd always tell us where the butthole cops were patrolling on any given night we were going out. Hey, stay the frick out of Whitefish tonight, guys. Good dude. Psycho daughter, but a good dude. I hope he's well. A buddy of mine's dad is pretty high up in his local police force in Canada. Anyway, they stopped enforcing possession laws regarding marijuana years before legalization. It was just too much of a trouble, a waste of time. They still go after dealers and the like, but anyone who happened to be possessing when booked gets a chance to chuck it or the like. It's just a waste of time to the cops there. Back in the day when I was in the popo in the state prisons, I was expected to write people up that had fresh tattoos. That's the stupidest thing ever. I just pulled them to the side and told them not to let me see it again, and I made them mop the day room. I've been an officer for 15 years, and there's a few things I disagree with. First is public intoxication. If you're smart enough to know you're too drunk to drive and are walking home instead, I'm not writing you up. Odds are I'll give you a ride home so you don't end up as a roadkill. Or DWIs if you're sleeping it off in your car, even if the keys are in the ignition or in your pocket. Again, if you're smart enough to know you're too drunk to drive, I'm not going to write you a ticket. Open container. If you're the designated driver and driving drunks home, I don't care if your friends are still drinking. I've been the DD and been drunk with a DD. I know there's times you can't keep a group of rowdy drunks from drinking. Noise ordinance. If you're having a get-together and the neighbors call because the party is too loud, I'll generally give you a warning to quiet it down, and I'll write you a ticket if I have to come back. I work in a small, rural community where 75% of the people are low income with little to no education. A large portion of them lack a high school diploma. Most of them are trying to squeak by on a job where they barely make minimum wage, so I don't really feel like giving them a crippling fine for these little things. Basically, I don't like being a jerk cop, and I'll usually give someone a warning for the first offense on something minor. The city aldermen have complained repeatedly about me not writing several more summons when I've been on a call, but I've stressed to them repeatedly that the police department is for keeping the city safe and secure. It will not be used as a revenue-generating machine. Conversely, if you're someone that I have constant issues with, or if you're doing something stupid that's seriously jeopardizing public safety, I'm going to write you tickets until my hand cramps. When did you have to lie about an injury because the truth was too humiliating? I once semi-dislocated my kneecap in such a way that my leg locked up and I was in incredible pain. I did this sitting down to eat at the dinner table and twisting my leg somehow, so I hurt myself sitting down. Instead, I told my friends that I'd fallen down a steep hill at a local heathland, but my brother told them the truth and I was promptly mocked. I broke my toe running from a bee. I'm a huge weenie about stinging bugs, so when I got a bee in my hair, I freaked out. I ran towards the house, lost my balance, and kicked the concrete steps of my mum's porch and fell backwards. Mum was sitting on the porch and I accidentally backhanded her before crashing to the ground. She was laughing so hard she couldn't help me up, and I was laughing so hard I couldn't get up. I was really embarrassed for a while and just told everyone I tripped. I got over the shame because it was pretty frickin' funny, so I don't lie about it anymore. I was once buttering toast with my face really close to it. I like the butter to be spread very precisely. Then I sneezed and slammed my head on the counter, effectively knocking myself out. I had to go to the ER to be treated for a concussion. In 3rd grade, I was holding a pencil in my fist, point up. I sneezed and face-planted into it. I'm 24 now, and every once in a while, someone tells me that I have blue ink on my forehead. I then have to tell them that it's actually a scar from stabbing myself in the face mid-sneeze. I can sympathize with you. So, I dislocated my kneecap while tickling my pickle. I lied and said I was falling off my bed when I woke up from a dream. I messed up my knee so bad one drunken wild night with the husband, and now, 12 years later, I have to go upstairs one at a time, and my knee aches with the simplest of weather changes. I really need to get it fixed and actually looked at by a good doctor, but that costs money, and I have more important crap to deal with. A caution to the rest of you. Don't do drunken canine-style bedroom stuff and fall off the bed onto the clothes hamper with your hands tied behind your back. I once fell out of bed and cracked my head open on a metal frame. There was blood everywhere, ER visit, stitches and stuff. I was about 6 years old. I still have the scar decades later. My mother literally changed our beds, even though we really couldn't afford to buy safer ones. The truth is, I didn't want to go to bed. So I flung myself out of bed to pretend to be hurt and maybe get to stay up for a short while longer. Well, mission overachieved on your goal there at least. Maybe there's something to be said for not shooting for the moon on every one of life's little endeavors. You should only commit that hard when it comes to things that will help you achieve your long-term goals, perhaps. I was removing facial hair using a remover cream. I ended up leaving it on for too long, which caused burns. I told people I dropped hot noodles on my face instead. I got surgery a few years ago on my knees as I dislodged some loose cartilage to the joint and also torn a bit of my meniscus. At the time, I was playing a ton of Ultimate Frisbee, so I just told people it was that. It actually happened when I was getting up from a chair. I dislocated my kneecap playing Ultimate Frisbee and I was embarrassed, so I told people I was sparring MMA. MMA beats Ultimate Frisbee beats chair. I got a black eye as a kid. I slipped and fell onto the support beam for my basketball rim. My dad made me lie to my other family members and say I got it defending some kids at school. He was pretty embarrassed at how terrible I was at basketball. Was getting hot and heavy with my boyfriend at the time. He reached under my shirt and unhooked my bra, and then pulled my shirt and bra up over my head at the same time. As he did this, the underwire from my cheap bra popped out and left a massive scratch right across my forehead. I made up some story about digging through my closet looking for something and getting scratched by a hanger. I have a 1.5-inch stab wound scar on my left bicep. When I was younger and attractive girls asked me how it happened, I'd tell them that it happened during a fight where someone pulled a knife on me. Actually, I worked in a butcher shop off a market when I was in my late teens. Part of my job was to collect all the carving knives from the prep area, put them into a large plastic bin and carry them behind the deli case to the kitchen to wash. One time coming back out of the kitchen, I failed to notice that somebody had opened the trapdoor to the basement in my direct path. While I was in the kitchen, the plastic bin I was holding was obscuring my view. I took one fateful step, opposite to the stairs side, and tumbled into the basement, with the contents of the bin raining down around me. Somehow, I escaped with only a twisted ankle and the aforementioned stab wound on my arm, for which I had to go to the ER for stitches. I'll always remember being dazed, sitting at the bottom of the stairs, looking up and seeing a meat cleaver embedded in one of the steps. To answer a lot of you, yes, the truth is a far better story than the lie. I'm a middle-aged man now, and I think that I told the knife fight alternative story way back then because it didn't really sink in that I could have died. I thought the truth made me out to be a klutz. As a teen, that seemed like logic. As an adult, I know a lot better. I cut my thumb with an axe. The cut was almost to the bone. I never told anyone because I was told not to play with the axe. This was when I was 6 years old. One time in chemistry, I managed to get a drop of concentrated sulfuric acid on my nose. It was the most physically painful experience of my entire life. I just sat in the back of the classroom, wiping tears out of my eyes silently because it was too awkward to say anything. Next lesson, people asked me what was up with my nose, and I had an awkward time explaining how you get sulfuric acid on your nose. I just itched it like an idiot. I fully took off my nail while playing football, is what I said. I was playing sport, just an intense game of sword fighting on Wii Sport Resort, and I slammed my hand really hard on a table. I have a scar that crosses my left eyebrow. It looks really cool, and I made it during a fight against a man with a knife. At least, that's what I tell everyone, because saying my PlayStation 2 fell on my face because I tried to lift it while not paying attention might sound too stupid. My grandmother noticed a mark on my forehead. It was round and just under an inch in diameter. She asked me what happened. Without missing a beat, I straight up replied with, "I burned my head with my hair straightener." She replied that I should be more careful. What really happened, you may ask? I got my head stuck between the back seat and armrest of a car, resulting in a friction burn, similar to carpet burn, while rooting or getting some or banging or having relations, whatever you want to call it, in the back seat. Nice, right? I was drunk walking home at 4 a.m., crossed a few train tracks and came across a 2-meter-high fence with tiny cylinders on top. I made the jump because I think I can. I fall. After standing up, worrying about my back pain, I look at my arm. My arm was completely torn open, covered in blood because it got stuck on the fence. I came into the ER and the nurse says she's seen shark bites before in Australia and this looked worse. I had 49 stitches and now have a scar from a, quote, shark bite. I once punched a bowling ball because I was frustrated. Turns out bowling balls are pretty hard. Broke my hand, it was swollen and bloody. Told my boss at work that I slammed my hand in a door. It's still broken, this was like 6 months ago. Got drunk, fell on my face on the pavement, said the huge gash on my forehead down to my cheek was from rugby. And to be fair, it was during a rugby social. I have these really ugly shoes that I wear around the house that my husband absolutely hates. I was taking laundry down the stairs and I fell down the stairs because of these same shoes. I couldn't tell him that because then he would be correct that my shoes are stupid, so I told him the dog ran between my legs and made me fall. I was in high school taking my morning shower. It was an older house and the shower was a tiled-in room with a glass door. Being the high school dork that I was, I thought that it would be cool if I ninja elbowed the door open. The whole door spiderweb cracked and one little piece popped out, leaving me with a nice gash on my elbow. My hand slipped, I said. The funny part was that about a week prior, my brother had sliced his hand open in the same shower, trying to open a bottle of shampoo with a pocket knife. Neither of us are very bright. Oh boy, not great genes that you have there. I've literally never had a shower product be in any way remotely difficult to open, so I'm just gonna have to put money on your brother not understanding how caps work. And judging by both your stories, that isn't a huge assumption to make. A scar across my forehead. I got it from hitting my head on a fan as a child, and it's still kinda there. I always just say that my cat scratched me and it went pretty deep, therefore the reason it's still there. I haven't exactly lied about it, but depending on who I'm talking to, I've been leaving out some important details. I got my wife an electric scooter for her birthday. The day she got it, we went for a ride. I was on my electric skateboard. It had recently rained a bit, so the pavement was a little wet, but not too bad as long as you were careful. I got the idea to pretend to fart and get a speed boost out of it. So I made a farting noise and totally gunned it. Since the pavement was damp, my board slid out from under me and I went down directly in front of my wife. She didn't have time to stop, so she also fell. We both got some scrapes and bruises. Unfortunately, she got it worse than I did. When telling the story, I've left out the toot boost part of it, if it's someone I'm not really close to. I have been waiting 25 years for this moment. As a 10-year-old boy, my friend had a mini-hoop on his closet door in his room. We'd always shoot the ball while playing Super Nintendo or whatever. One day we started shooting and then had a real one-on-one game with dribbling, scorekeeping, and stuff like that. I went for a dunk and didn't realize the closet doorknob was missing and it was just jagged metal jutting out of the door. I remember looking down and seeing my shorts torn open and a bloody gash, and I was in shock. The cut was inches from my man parts. This was a close one. It wasn't bleeding a ton, but I could see fat and other strange stuff. It was a couple of inches long and I was a frickin' idiot 10-year-old, so I got a bunch of bandages from his house and limped home. Neosporin and bandages for weeks until it healed. I never told my parents. I'm not sure why. I have a visible scar to this day. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was out of work for months for this one. Broke my finger and severed the tendon, catching a heavy door to hold it for a cute girl. I was having some trouble with my heart a few months ago that caused dizziness and occasional fainting. Passed out while in the shower and sprained my wrist. I told my co-workers it was a workout injury because I passed out in the shower was a visual I didn't want to give everyone. To be honest, saying you sprained your wrist in the shower isn't a visual you want to give them either. Finally, a story I can share. I was playing football, or soccer, with a bunch of friends. I was 12. Since we were all still school kids, one team was usually going to steamroll the other. On this occasion, I happened to be the keeper on the winning team, so I had nothing to do and I was really bored. I decided it was a good time to do some pull-ups, so I grabbed the crossbar of the goalpost and pulled myself up. Once I was on top, I stuck out my legs for fun and got them stuck in the net. I ended up falling to the ground and stuck out my hands to prevent myself from breaking my tailbone. I eventually found out that I'd broken my left wrist, with one of the bones inside the wrist being pushed out of position and slightly fractured. What I told my parents, and the doctor too, was that I was running after the ball and tripped over something, thus causing me to fall face first and break my wrist. In short, broke my wrist doing a pull-up on a goalpost. Told the parents and the doctor that I tripped while running after the football. I jumped off a 12-foot recreational climbing wall drunkenly to impress a boy and broke both of my legs, putting me in a wheelchair for the rest of summer. When I explained it, it was just abbreviated to, I had a rock climbing accident. I was wasted and fell in the parking lot of my friend's apartment and busted my face wide open at her birthday party. The birthday party just so happened to be the night before a second date with this really cute girl I met on Tinder. So I went to the date and told the girl that a dog at work had knocked me over and I fell on my face. I work with dogs, and me being put on my butt by a Great Dane or some other huge pup isn't unusual, and she understood. While on the date, some guys came up to me and rudely asked me what the frick happened to my face. My Tinder date grabbed my hand and made up some story about how I got in a fight defending her honor at a bar or some nonsense. I could hardly keep a straight face while she was telling the story, but she sold it, I can tell you. It wasn't until a few days later that I told her the real story of how I actually got hurt. Tinder date and I are getting married soon. I poured scalding hot grease into my shoe when working in a kitchen. I had to look my boss dead in the eye and say I was fine because I was scared to get substance tested. I waited 10 minutes to go and investigate the damage so that nothing seemed suspicious. And it was the worst burn I've ever had. I have scars on my knees that I tell everyone I got from a bad fall. It's plausible because I'm very clumsy. In reality, I was doing the deed with a guy on the floor of his bedroom and I got rug burn on my knees from when I was on top. Do you want to know how I got these scars? I broke my eggplant once. Look, I was tired, practically asleep, I was about to jump on my bed to go to sleep, and I missed somehow. I landed on the floor with a chub. It hurt like a motherfricker. I just said I got mugged and hit with a bat. When I was younger, we dismantled one of those plastic football goals and reassembled it into a giant golf club. I was then swiftly hit in the face, causing my cheek to rip open. I had to tell my dad that somebody kicked the football too hard into my face because I didn't want to admit that I was beaten by a homemade plastic rod. I got a second-degree burn on my butt cheeks. My friends stupidly let it slip during a dinner with my mum. I had to quickly lie and say that I was taking a bath and that I didn't check the water. Because every human gets into the bathtub butt first, right? I really got the injury from pouring oatmeal, which hadn't cooled down, into the back of a diaper I was wearing. Do I want to know? I'm trying to think of some kind of situation where this isn't a weird bedroom thing, and I'm honestly just coming up blank. Please, supply your theories as to why people are pouring hot porridge into a worn adult diaper, because I can't deal with this level of humanity on a Monday. I threw out my back sneezing. I told people I was moving something heavy because that was less stupid than the truth. Not me, but once I had a friend lie about how they broke their wrist. He was only about 16 at the time, but told everybody that he broke it by falling down the stairs. Turns out his mum walked in on him with his digits inside his partner, and he jerked his arm away in an awkward position, causing the break. An ex-boyfriend and I were once getting busy, and he was repeatedly slapping me in the face while throttling me. Granted, it was a little harder than I prefer. He was also on white snow, and in my experience, people don't always realize how aggressive they're being while on that stuff, but it wasn't unbearable or anything. He suddenly stopped a few minutes later, eyes wide in awe. "Did I do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "Your face is all bruised." "Oh, it's fine, I'll look at it later," I said dismissively. Later comes around and I look in the mirror to see a purple handprint outlined across my cheeks. Even the lines of his hands were painted on my face in broken blood vessels. My parents didn't know that I was dating him, and they certainly didn't think that I was doing the deed, especially like that. On my way home, I stopped at Ulta and got color-correcting makeup. I piled it on using the mirror in my car, and wore my hair down and slightly over my face. My parents could still see some bruising though, and when they asked what had happened, I told them this absolute whopper. Well, I was driving home from work and dropped my water bottle. It started to roll as if it was going to get in the way of the brake pedal, so I bent down to grab it. While I was still kind of bent down, a cat ran onto the road and I slammed on the brakes, and I hit my face on the wheel. In short, ex-boyfriend left a handprint bruise on my face. I told my parents and my other friends and family that I hit it on the steering wheel. I broke my wrist in gym class playing kickball when I was 16 or 17. The grass was wet, and the girl on first base was a big and lazy girl, and I was in the shortstop position. So when I saw a kick go straight along the baseline, I knew what to expect. Girl didn't even bend down to try and stop it, just kinda waved one arm at her side. So I was running to try and get to it. I stopped it with one arm, but the grass was super wet and my feet just kept going. I fell down hard and had my left arm behind me to brace the fall. The only cool part of the story is that I finished out the rest of the game with what should have been a very obviously broken wrist. I went to the gym teacher afterwards and asked if I could go to the nurses for an ice pack before getting changed. And he was just like, Oh crap, that's broken. He flagged a kid to escort me to the nurses, and after a bit of walking and going up the stairs and adrenaline wearing off, I went into shock and I fainted. I told everyone in my first few years of college that it happened playing high school soccer instead of gym class kickball. I didn't play soccer in high school. A friend of mine broke his member while rolling over with morning wood on the bed. He got his super hot girlfriend at the time to say that it happened during the deed. This was not the kind you could hide. He was laid up, legs spread open for a month and another 2 before he could walk again. It was 6 months before he was back to normal. His wife, the same girl, just married him. She later told us the truth during a Christmas drinking game. I once gave myself a black eye trying to move one of those heavy boxes or containers of cat litter. I leaned over to pick it up, and unbeknownst to me, it was actually empty instead of the full 35 pounds I was expecting. So I brought it up way faster than expected, and the corner of the container clocked me in the eye. Thankfully, my school and friends know that I'm fairly clumsy as it is, so they didn't even really bat an eye at it once I assured them that it was just clumsiness. A fun tidbit, I've lived in the same house since I was born, and I've fallen down the same stairs I literally learned how to stairs on over 25 times in my life. I'm 18, almost 19 now. In high school, I was just messing around with some friends in the parking lot after school, and I'd jumped off the back end of my friend's car while it was in motion. I landed on my foot really goofily. I either broke a bone in my foot or badly sprained it because I couldn't really walk on it. I didn't want my mum to get mad at me for being an idiot, so I wrapped it up every day for a few months to keep it straight and not hurting. The pain eventually went away, but it was a rough few months that I had to fake not having a limp. My mum never really questioned why I was wearing pants every day for the early summer months, so whatever. My trifluoroacetic acid scar that's about 6 inches by 4 inches on my left forearm isn't a lab accident, as I tell people. I used the acid to cover my self-inflicted scars, which were prolific and noticeable. I got the idea from the hot iron scene in the movie Rush, where Jason Patrick burns off his needle marks. This scar is still incredibly obvious, but it's easily explained away. I never admitted that to anyone. I did it in 1995. I got super mad, and in my stupidity, I punched a wall and broke my hand along with snapping all the tendons in the pinky side of the same hand. To avoid disappointed stares and judging looks, I just said I dropped some furniture on it. What one weird trick does a profession actually hate? I'm always seeing those ads about how doctors and skincare specialists hate her, and wondering what secret tips really tee off entire professions. Thanks for the comments, everyone. Most disposal problems can be fixed with a few turns of an Allen wrench on the underside of the disposal. It manually fixes jams. Most people seem not to know this and call a plumber instead. I don't really care that much, but a regular customer at the McDonald's I work at has learned how to beat the system. Sausage and egg McMuffin, $2.99. Sausage McMuffin, $1. Round egg a la carte, on the side, 79 cents. He pays $1.79 and puts the egg on his muffin himself. Saves himself $1.20 every time. Ask your hospital if they have a prepaid discount for most of their procedures. We did not have maternity insurance when my wife got pregnant with both our kids. I went to the billing office 6 months before she was due in the nicest hospital in town. When I asked how much labor and delivery was, I was quoted in excess of 12 grand. I simply asked if there was a discount if I paid in advance. I was quoted 2.9 grand. I made payments for 6 months, about $500 a month, and walked into the hospital on the day she went into labor. Delivered, stayed for 2 days, standard, and walked out. Never received a bill. I repeated the process 2 years later for our second child, and I think the bill was 3.1 grand at that time. I was positive I'd receive another bill, but we never have. Gift cards don't expire in the state of California at the time of writing in 2014. If a gift card has a monetary value, like a $50 Amazon gift card, then it legally can't expire. If it says that it's expired when you try to use it, contact the retailer directly and inform them that you live in California. They'll issue a replacement. For clarity, it seems from other comments that this isn't limited to just my state. I only knew this from personal experience and didn't do any research. There are also people asking questions about fees and places that have shut. Some cards charge a maintenance fee, like a couple of dollars a month, until the card runs out. But people have pointed out that sometimes that's illegal too. If the store has gone bankrupt or disappeared, I think it's safe to assume you missed out though. Happy to see how many people this has helped, and I hope some people have found gift cards from Christmases past. At gas stations, at least in my state, they have to turn on the air for you to inflate your tires if you ask. No need to put quarters in the machine. The gas station attendants always make a sour face when I ask, so I assume they hate it. Free compressed air. The narrator wouldn't be surprised if in the years since these were posted, many of them have been updated or become more widely known, but you can never guess. I honestly didn't know that the air pumps weren't just free in every part of the world. There you have it. They're meant to be free, and you might still be able to check if you need a quick pump. This is the law here too. The response has always been, "We don't have a switch for the air pump," or "Sorry, it's broken." See, that's when you pull out the checkbook and write something while tutting, then give them a smile and say, "Okay, well, on with the rest of the inspection." Worked in the garage door business for a few months. So many times we'd get calls out. My garage door isn't closing. We get to the house and there's a leaf in front of the safety eye. Before calling, make sure A, there isn't anything obstructing the safety eye, and B, the unit isn't unplugged. Another real easy call is a wiring issue. Sometimes technicians won't put any electrical tape on any wires that they had to splice. Do a quick check to see if there's any wiring that's touching what it shouldn't be touching. Also, on the unit, verify that the wiring is actually connected. Lastly, if you're having issues with it going halfway up or down and then reversing, it's likely the force. As the unit gets used more and more and gets older, the force needs to be adjusted. On most units, there are 2 screws on the side or back of the unit. Take a small flathead screwdriver and adjust the up and down force up a notch and test it. These 3 tips will save you a $60 to $90 service call. Knowing that so many so-called locksmiths are the drill and replace type, they know nothing about actual lockpicking and will just bust out the drill the lock, and overcharge you for a cheap replacement, usually the Kwikset brand lock. I worked for a national unlocking company for a few years, and we did it all. Picking, drilling, rekeying, and replacement, even stocked various brands of locks. In many cases, though, drilling is a quicker option, especially if you can sell a new lock into the bargain. Some locks are just plain frickin' difficult to get. Also, people can simply tell the locksmith not to damage anything. If they can't pick it, thank them for their effort and call another company. The 1040 EZ IRS form. Tens of millions of Americans can use it. It takes about 5 minutes to fill out, and it's no harder than completing a library card application. The H&R Block, Jackson Hewitt, and Mass Marketing Tax Services would prefer that you A, be terrified of tax filing, and believe that it can only be done properly for you by paid professionals, and B, deluded into thinking an airplane load of money is going to drop on your house that only those professionals can find. Neither is the case. For most people, there's no secret path to a giant surprise windfall refund. And if you get a huge refund, then you've screwed up your withholding rate and should stop lending the government so much money interest-free in the course of the tax year. If you have a simple picture, like most people, file your form yourself. And if you're amongst the minority with a complicated tax picture, the last place you should go for help is a storefront operation in a mini-mall. Get a reputable private CPA. Airlines don't want you to know this rule. US-based travelers can cancel or change their flights for free within 24 hours of booking. Some airlines do get around this, American is one. They don't allow you to cancel within 24 hours of booking. Instead, they allow you to hold your ticket at a price for 24 hours without having to pay. If you've gone ahead and actually purchased the ticket, then you're all done and have no 24 hours to work with. I want to point out that this law only applies if it's also more than 7 days before your date of travel. While I don't know your specific situation, a lot of credit cards have built-in traveler's insurance. Next time, not only book your flight directly with the airline, but use a credit card. Terms and conditions apply, but as long as you've paid for the tickets with the card, you're covered. As always, keep the receipts. And finally, note that if you do elect to cancel your flight within 24 hours and rebook, presumably with a cheaper fare, the interval between the cancellation and rebooking leaves you without a reservation for a seat that anyone else in the world could take. Therefore, it's always better to make changes with an airline agent who can make the flight changes more or less instantaneously, as opposed to doing all of this online on your own. That said, some airlines charge a fee for any bookings that involve one of their agents. I've been lifeguarding in some capacity for 10 years. The one weird trick that annoys me is that kids can be unaccompanied by an adult if they're over 7, and some parents use pools as cheap after-school care. No problem for the lifeguard, but when you see the same lonely kid for 5 afternoons a week, it gets depressing. My sister used to work at a pool in the bad part of town. She noticed the same kid every single day and felt so bad she talked to him and tried to befriend him. At the end of the season, I live in a snowy state, he asked her if she would be his mom. She was only 15 at the time. Pretty sad stuff. The 7.3L turbo diesel is one of the finest engines in the world, but it has a huge flaw in the design of the wiring harness that communicates electrically with the injectors under the intake valve cover. This harness works itself loose over time and eventually will present all sorts of issues in your truck. Check engine light, stuttering and shaking at particular throttle positions, injector missing, stuff like that. Well, if you take a US quarter coin and use an angle grinder to cut the quarter down to the right size, you can wedge it into the wiring harness connector, forcing it to stay connected tightly for pretty much forever. This is known as the 50-cent fix because you have to do it on both sides of the engine. You take your truck to a mechanic with this issue and you'll pay over $1,000 to get it sorted. Ultimately, they'll fix it with a $10 plastic part from Ford. Those butthole thieves will rob you blind if you let them. I'm a social media manager, and the thing I hate is when my boss regularly asks, "How do we get this on Reddit?" The electric company does actually hate a lot of the one weird tricks, because a lot of those weird tricks can actually cause what we refer to as one weird death, when someone gets electrocuted by some idiot's electrical nightmare bullcrap capacitor scheme. Or they're running a not-to-code, grid-tied electrical science project and backfeeding what should be a dead circuit. Or they hook up a generator backwards through a 240-volt outlet after a storm to power the house, and they don't open the main breaker first. It works, but it could also kill someone if it's not done right. In 2011, an estimated 47,700 home structures fires reported to the US fire departments involved some kind of electrical failure or malfunction as a factor contributing to ignition. These fires resulted in 418 civilian deaths, 1,570 civilian injuries, and $1.4 billion in direct property damage. Between 2007 and 2011, home electrical fires represented 13% of total home structure fires and 18% of associated civilian deaths. I have to say, don't try any home science projects on your electrical system. Get a licensed, trained electrician, preferably one with good references, to do any electrical work. Many wiring schemes will work for years until they don't, and then they cause instant death or a fire. Some of the things posted here are not to be taken as a challenge or a do-it-yourself project, by the way. Again, these are things most electricians and utilities hate because they can and do kill people. Yeah, I feel like although these loopholes, tricks, and bits of know-how can be things that save us a lot of money or are ways to exploit really bad faith manufacturers or trade practitioners, you do need to read up on the solutions before you go ahead and practice them. And look at the comments on these posts suggesting things and see if there are people saying, "Don't do this." And yeah, for anything with a circuit, maybe leave that to a professional. The Starbucks secret menu. If you have to use it, tell them the ingredients, not the name. We aren't trained to make a cookies and cream dark chocolate birthday cake frappuccino. Extreme couponing really does work. A lady came through my line today and had a preliminary total of $168.59. After I ran a handful of coupons, she got out of there with us having handed her 16 cents in change. That blew my frickin' mind. Even though it was in my line, I could only smile and laugh at it. I wasn't even that excited when I used to watch that show on TLC back in 2008. We paid her to take merchandise off of our hands. My CSM didn't know what to do, so had to get up the ASM to my line after he verified I did everything correctly, and he opened up the till and said, "Give the lady her 16 cents. My sister used to do that stuff. She had spreadsheets and notebooks and crap. It got to the point that the assistant manager would temporarily open a line for her to check out, so she didn't clog up another line for 10 minutes. She bought a lot of things she didn't need because she needed them for another coupon to work. Frequently, this would be shampoo and body wash. Since she didn't need it, she'd give it to me. I'd just stick it in my closet and forget about it. One time I took stock and I had something like 15 bottles of Old Spice, 20 bottles of Irish Spring, and another 20 bottles of assorted brands. I ended up keeping 5 or 6 bottles for myself and taking the rest to a homeless shelter because who needs that much body wash? Hobos. That's who. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Ordering glasses from Zenni Optical online for $12 instead of paying $250. Yes, that $12 includes frames and lenses. When you get your eye prescription, you need to get your pupillary distance measurement, or PD. Tell them that you'd like this as part of your prescription. When you order from Zenni, they'll include a device for free that you can use to measure your PD. Or if you contact them, they'll ship you one for free. And for those people saying that their optometrists won't give them the PD, you might try telling them that you need that information upfront before you make the appointment, and then again at the beginning of the exam. That way, if they're going to give you a hassle, you can simply go somewhere else. Walmart optometrists are all independent from Walmart, so they don't really care if you don't buy your glasses from there or not. Lawyer here. We hate legal Zoom documents, not because it's taking business away from us, but because we have to clean up the mess it makes when people try to use them. Having new lenses made for your old glasses. The real profit is in selling frames. Accountant here, and I used to work for an accountant that specialized in tax work, filing personal income taxes for clients. These accountants hate it when people are smart enough to do their own taxes. But here's the thing, filing taxes is easy. In most cases, your taxes are extremely easy to file. Take your tax slips, enter those numbers into a free tax program, and file it. In some cases, it only takes about 10 to 15 minutes to complete a client's file, and we charge them a few $100. Want to avoid paying so much money for an accountant to file your taxes? That one weird trick is to get off your butt and punch in your tax yourself. You literally just look at your pieces of paper and type it in. And to clarify, I'm not saying tax accountants are useless. They're helpful if you have a complicated file with foreign income and business expenses and all that other stuff. They can even point out some deductions that you might miss if you use a free software, such as childcare costs, unless you already knew about those. But if you're single and all you have is employment income and investments, you're better off doing the work yourself. Security guard here. Just know that you can walk away and tell the guard to pound sand, unless of course you've actually broken the law and they witnessed you do it. If a security guard demands to see an ID, you can tell him no and just walk away. Security is not a sworn law enforcement officer and can't legally force you to show ID, and can't arrest or detain you unless they eyewitness you breaking the law. Some places post signs that this establishment has the right to search your bags and property. No, they don't. They have the right to ask your permission to search your bag and ask you to leave if you decline, but it's illegal for them to just grab your stuff and go through it without cause and without your consent. If you haven't committed a crime and a store security guard says, "Show me what's in your bags," it's 100% legal to simply say no and keep on walking. If people knew how often I Googled their IT questions, I'd be out half a job. Effective Googling is an art, and so is knowing exactly what to Google. That said, you should pray that your users don't start rebooting computers by themselves. That'd be a problem. I work as an internet sales specialist for a chain of car dealerships, and if the average person knew how easy it is to get the cheapest possible price on a new car, I wouldn't have a job. Literally, all you have to do is start a bidding war between two dealerships. Submit inquiries online to both of them and explicitly tell them that you're shopping. Anytime one of them comes at you with a deal, just present that number to the other one. They're going to keep trying to beat each other until they financially can't anymore, and that's when you have your cheapest price. The real kicker to this is that the dealers trade vehicles between them all the time, and the market isn't as saturated in new cars as you may think. If you're looking for something very specific and not super common, there's a very good chance that they're trying to sell you the same car. But now that I've told you all that, I'd like to take the time to remind you that the days of sleazy salesmen are mostly done. Please don't be a jerk to your salesman under the assumption that they're trying to rip you off, because in most cases they're just trying to put food on the table. The ability to rip people off isn't nearly as bad as it used to be before the internet. I did this for my recent car. I had 3 dealerships outbidding each other. I ended up teeing off all 3 of them and really aggravating the one that I bought it from because I talked the sales guy into putting a spoiler on for free at the end. I got a call from the manager a few days later saying they couldn't do that because it would end up costing them money on the sale. So I told them to keep the car. They'd already put the spoiler on it. Yeah, he was bluffing. Well, one way you can make an entire profession hate you is thinking you can do away with an entire profession by using one weird trick. As a former web designer, for me it's thinking that your nephew who knows about computers apparently and has done his own web page is a viable alternative to a professional web developer for your company website. Haha, yes indeed. As I mentioned before, you do need to balance any enthusiasm you have for these suggestions with some caution. I too love saving money. However, when that means that my budget option or trick results in me losing money down the line, it's often probably worth checking out some professionals. Electrical engineer here. Fixing fuses by putting a coin or a bit of wire in there. That's a big, dangerous, stupid no-no. That's why you use a .22 long rifle round instead. I'm an ERRN. This is one trick many people use to get into a room ahead of other people. Tell them you have chest pain going down your left arm. We take that seriously and will bring you right back. Now, the reason we hate this is more than just the fact that you're a D-bag that just cut the 95-year-old lady waiting for 4 hours with back pain off. It's because you're going to get rushed in, have a CBC, BMP, troponin, EKG, IV, chest X-ray, and IV. When the doctor comes in and wants to talk about your chest pain that has now mysteriously disappeared, they'll be confused as to why you're now concerned about the fact it burns when you pee after hooking up with that chick at the club the other night. This requires an entirely different set of tests than what we've just done. You are a jerk. You will be ignored, and we hate you. We will be making fun of your burning eggplant, and you will receive no creature comforts while you're here. You will not have your call light answered. We have ways of torturing those that knowingly do not follow the rules. You jerk. EMT here, and we hate it as well. Oh, the night shelter filled up on beds and all of a sudden you have 10 out of 10 chest pain? Well, your near-perfect vitals say you're probably a liar, your EKG looks better than mine, and you've been texting on your phone for the last 5 minutes. Oh, you're allergic to every pain med except morphine. What a hard life for you. And now you're faking a seizure. Wonderful. I'll call every medical research facility and tell them we have a medical miracle here, as it's the first frickin' seizure where the person has been able to talk to me at the same time they're seizing. End rant. Eating less and regular exercise is enough to lose weight in most cases. I used to work at Arby's, so the secret trick there is to not eat at Arby's. Complaining at a restaurant to get free food. Go F yourself, repeatedly. If you have nothing at hand, feel free to borrow my biggest knife. Used to work for the city. My job was to keep the libraries and public buildings' lawns clean and well trimmed. There's this one trick where instead of bagging up my grass clippings, I'd blow them into the street so that it was no longer under my job description to clean it up. My foreman hated that one. Yelling, "Am I being detained?" repeatedly to a police officer will get you off any crime, because the officer will punch you in your smug face, causing the case to be tossed out. If you're a student, just read the syllabus. A host of information is in there, and it's the binding document between you and your school about grades and other policies. So, in college, I was taking Chemistry 2 with this jerk bag of a professor. Super D-bag kind of guy. The syllabus stated clearly, each student is allowed to drop their lowest test score, including the final, from their grade. This teacher, though he was a jerk, did allow us to use our textbooks and notes for all tests. So long story short, I was ejected from the final because I, along with half the class, was using a textbook and notes during the final, and he randomly decided the day before that notes and textbooks weren't allowed on the final, and only half the class got that memo. The day after, I went to see the professor to explain. Apparently, having someone with the stones to talk back to him teed him off. So he told me that I wasn't allowed to drop the final anymore, and I had to take the score of 0, and I could drop a different test if I wanted. I was sitting at an A-, so taking a 0 on the final and dropping my lowest test score, an 82, would have dropped me down to a B- or C+ territory. I was livid, and I decided, screw this guy, he isn't getting away with this. I marched my butt over to the dean's office, presented all the information to him, and even got others from the class to testify that, yes, indeed they were allowed to drop their final scores, and ultimately it all came down to what was on the syllabus. It took me almost an entire semester going through the university red tape bullcrap, but in the end, one day the professor sends me an email telling me to meet him after his lab one day. I go to his office and he is red-faced and huffing like an asthmatic idiot. He was pretty overweight. He tells me the dean is forcing him to change my grade to an A-. I had to sign a document saying that I wouldn't push the issue. I signed, smiled at him and left. Never said a word. As I walked away, I did an 80s-style fist pump and time froze. Okay, that last part isn't true, but the rest is. Screw that butthole. Police officers hate it when you say no comment and wait with your lawyer. There are so many completely legal tactics and tricks the police can employ to get you to confess stuff. There are also so many unpredictable implications of answering even the most innocent questions. If you're arrested, just remember the cops aren't your friend and they do not have your interests in mind. Don't say anything to any of them, not the arresting officer, not the guy behind the desk, and not the guy who brings you your food. Nobody. There's a reason why you have the right to remain silent is specifically stated, because it's one of the most important rights you have. Use it. What went down in cringe history as the worst date you've ever been on? It wasn't necessarily the date, which was bad on its own, but the fact that she hung out in my parking lot for 2 hours after she dropped me off in case I changed my mind about doing something after dinner. Ugh. Back in college, I was invited to an ice rink with a girl that I liked and some of her friends. I didn't know how to ice skate and I didn't pick it up very quickly, but I wanted to try and impress her somehow. Well, I hugged the wall the whole time and made a complete fool of myself. The highlight was when I saw a flash of light as I fell in front of a group of people. Turns out I'd fallen right at the moment someone else took a picture, so my failure was immortalized forever. This girl took me back to my apartment and ended the relationship before it began. On a lighter note, the woman who is now my wife was at that ice rink on that one night. We didn't realize we were there the same time until a year or two into our relationship. She exclaimed, "You were that guy who couldn't ice skate." Yeah, she didn't seem that into you. He was more than 3 hours late, and he was texting me telling me that he was 20 minutes away for 2 of those hours. As soon as he arrived, he tried to tell me to leave the part of the dive bar I'd already paid into so that we could go where he wanted, tried to start a fight with a friend that I'd happened to run into, and called my aunt, who had talked me into going out with him in the first place, a groin-blocking B-word. I just walked away from him after that last one, and we never spoke again. I waited that long for him at the venue because I liked the bands that were playing. I wouldn't have stayed if I was sitting around doing nothing. He got there just before the last band finished, but I'd had about enough of him by then, because he had been telling me that he was on the train in the same place for 2 hours. We don't live out in the middle of nowhere, and he could have easily gotten a bus or tram the rest of the way in that time if there was a problem with the train. He never gave me a proper excuse, but I didn't really care at that point. The guy told me he had just recently got out of a long-term relationship, so he wasn't looking for a commitment, but asked me if he could be my maintenance man as he stroked himself through his jeans. Went on a blind date with a lady who wouldn't stop picking at her scabs, just made a pile out of them on the restaurant table. I excused myself to the washroom, and when I came back, my soup was there, but the pile of scabs wasn't. No, I didn't eat the soup. Okay, that's the first dry heave of the recording day out of the way. Interesting that you can almost guarantee these gag moments in medical or restaurant videos, but it's a real 50-50 shot when you get to the dating ones. Let's see if there are any more challenges to the sanctity of my stomach ahead. I went out with a guy that my roommate set me up with a few years ago. First, he was vocally irritated that I wore heels because it made him less taller than me. Note that he was still taller than me by a few inches, but was just less taller. Dinner went all right, although we didn't have a whole lot in common. After dinner, we met back up with my roommate and her boyfriend, and we all went to a house party of their friends. I basically knew nobody there. At the party, my date's somewhat recent ex-girlfriend was there, and to summarize, she called me a working girl, spilled my drink on me, threatened to fight me, told me she gave him herpes, left, came back an hour looking for me, hugged me, grabbed my butt, apologized, and told me that I was hot. So I guess it went pretty well by the end of the night. One time I went on an OkCupid date and everything was normal right up until the end. She was a cute, blonde girl that liked some of the things I liked. We seemed to make each other laugh via OkCupid, so I asked her if she wanted to meet. And she said, sure. We met up at the Elephant and Castle in San Francisco. It's a popular bar and has enough room to have private conversations. I was kind of nervous and didn't want to drink because I was on medication, but she called me out, so I ordered what she ordered, a pear cider. We went upstairs and nervously talked. At first it was awkward, but we both seemed to loosen up quickly. She had a darker sense of humor than I expected, bringing up topics like burned bodies discovered on the side of the road and making jokes. I'm into it and I played along too. Everything seemed completely fine and normal, and I start maybe even to like her, and she touches me playfully, and it just seemed completely normal and easy. Then suddenly, without anything weird being said or anything happening, no phone call or emotion or reaction, she just gets up and walks away rapidly. I was so confused by the suddenness, I thought maybe I'd missed something she had said, and I followed her through the crowded bar as she increased her speed. She never looked back at me or anything, she just kept going for the door. I thought maybe she was having a panic attack or something like that, but when we got outside, she was completely fine. She kept walking away at top speed when I finally said, "Hey, wait a moment." She turned around with this look on her face like she didn't even know who I was and said, "Yes?" I was like, so that was so sudden. I just wanted to say goodbye. Maybe we can shake hands or something?" I didn't really know what to say, and I tried to make a joke thinking about the least intimate greeting. She said, "Why?" as she stuck out her hand and put it in mine awkwardly. Then she turned around and hightailed it out of there. I took a minute and looked at her walking away and tried to retrace my steps of what we'd said and done, and tried thinking of why she had reacted like that. I felt like I must be the crappiest person ever. What I didn't notice while thinking was that there was this huge crowd of people smoking outside the bar. It must have been 50 people just all around the bar, and we'd been standing right in the center of them. I didn't notice at first, but after she left they all started cracking jokes about me. Like tons and tons of jokes, and it was like suddenly I could hear them. So I looked around me, kind of wondering what was happening until I recognized that these jokes were all about me. Finally, one very tall guy smoking a clove shouted loudly, Ah, crap, Romeo, you screwed that crap right up. Look at how fast that B-word is walking away. Everyone just erupted in laughter. I was so double-stunned that I just kind of walked away slowly towards the BART station. As I walked, I heard the same voice yell, "Ah, crap, did I hurt that guy's feelings? Sorry, brother. That's not the worst date I've been on, but it is the one that I think a lot of in the shower when I feel depressed." We spent most of the date going shopping for clothes for another date she had later that week. It was kind of funny seeing as how she was the one that asked me out. Oh, I've got a couple. I met a guy from OkCupid. He knowingly used pictures that didn't accurately reflect the way he looked and kept saying, "You look just like your pics," in shock. He then told me that I reminded him of his mother, like that was a good thing. Met another guy from OKC. He seemed nice, but never stopped talking. After interrupting me for the third or fourth time, I finally asked him, "Do you want to hear anything I have to say?" And he apologizes profusely and says, "You're right, I'm so sorry," and he pulls out a pad of paper and a pen. He then jots notes as I'm telling him about myself and whatnot. I finally ask him what he's doing, and he says, "Oh, I'm writing down things I want to tell you when it's my turn to talk again." I did end up giving him a second chance. He said he'd just been nervous that first time. But on our second date, he had burned me a CD of his favorite music, after I'd already told him I don't really listen that much to music, and he had written hundreds of decimals of pi out on the makeshift CD cover. I also hate math. He didn't really listen to anything I had to say, so I let him down easy. I went on a Tinder date with a guy who is now in my contacts as "Do Not Answer Eggplant Pic." Prior to the date, he seemed normal. We texted and talked on the phone, and then arranged to meet at a restaurant and bar. He was cute, but definitely bitter about something. He was from California, and apparently didn't like this new city we were in. He started talking about bedroom stuff and down-under kisses, and then complaining about how uptight everyone here is about doing the deed. He invited the waitress to a party his company was throwing, after sending back the French fries he had ordered. I showed him a picture of my dog on my phone, and he took out his phone and showed me a picture of his eggplant. We walked out of the restaurant together to get our cars from the valet. My car came first and I left. He texted me later that he had my sweater, apparently I'd dropped it on the way out, and if I wanted to see it again, I'd have to hang out with him. Rest in peace, sweater. Yep, it would have had to be a pretty expensive piece of clothing to justify risking that meetup, and it would have had to be in a public place, right? Honestly, I'm amazed you kept the meetup going as long as you did. It happened to my cousin. Not me, my cousin, and I will tell this story till I die. Her and I lived together at the time. She worked at a tanning salon. She mentions this guy Vaughn that started coming in, and he's really hot and he always flirts with her. So I guess 2 weeks after back and forth flirting, Vaughn asks her out on a date. She comes home and gets all prettied up. I wished her luck, told her to please call me if she decides to stay over so that I know she's okay. She's a few years younger than me and I have no idea who this guy is, so anyways, she ends up calling me about 5 hours later. Hysterical. Bawling her eyes out. I couldn't understand a word. All I can make out is, "I'm in the hospital. My car is at blah 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 address. Please go get it and then come pick me up." So my boyfriend and I go in to get her car. We drop it off at her house, and then my boyfriend decides to pick up a couple of buddies of his along the way because it sounds like somebody needed a butt kicking. We've got no idea what was going on. We get to the hospital and she's outside shivering. A man is standing near her but not beside her. He looks worried and she looks like hell. She jumps in the car and screams, "Just drive!" Me being mad as F, I say to the guy, "Are you Vaughn?" He looks like he's going to cry at any second. He explains, "Yes, but please don't be mad. I brought her here. I had to. She didn't want me to. Please let me explain." My cousin is in absolute hysterics at this point, punching the back of the seat. "Please, go!" I said, "I don't have time to listen to you. She wants to go home and I need to take care of her." We drove home. I keep asking what the F happened. "Please tell me now. Did he hurt you? Do we need to call the cops?" And her response is, "No, please, nothing like that. I'll tell you at home, not in front of other people." So I left it at that. Dying inside to know, we get home and I tuck her into bed. I give her some tea and try and calm her down, and every time she tries to explain, she buries her face and cries. Finally, I get it out of her. After she left our house, she met him at his house. They talked and had a coffee, and he asked what she'd like to do, and she suggests a movie. He said, "Okay, let's go to Blockbuster." They went to Blockbuster, and this is where it all starts. They pick their movie and head to the cashier. She remembers saying she doesn't feel so good, and then immediately her memory goes forward to waking up on the floor. Vaughn tells her that she'd passed out and hit her head pretty hard on the counter. She said he was begging her to go to the hospital right then and there, and she said, "No, I'll be fine. Let's just go home and watch the movie." He agrees. They go back to his place. He keeps asking if she's alright, if she'd please change her mind and go to the hospital. She says no over and over. She doesn't remember falling asleep, but she guessed that's what happened because suddenly she wakes up urgently needing to crap and hurl. She has no idea of the layout of this guy's house, so she scrambles to the floor, feeling dizzy again, starts crawling, literally, and asking where the washroom is. He tries picking her up to take her, but she said she couldn't hold back and throws up all over the place, all over him, craps her pants, and starts crying. She said he was so concerned, he didn't even care, he just took her to the bathroom to finish. While they made it to the bathroom, she said she pulled down her pants before she made it to the toilet and goes like a parrot all over the walls. He gently closes the door and says, "Pass me your clothes," and he had something for her to wear. She agrees and does so. She said she stopped chucking up and crapping and finally agreed to go to the hospital. He takes her, and then shortly after I got that phone call. While she's telling me this, I'm laughing so hard, crying, rubbing her head, and wondering if this is all a joke. Turns out it wasn't. They ended up getting married, and we bring this up at least once a year. It was a surprisingly happy ending, and I do truly love telling the story because of that fact. I'll be honest, I was kind of hesitant to tell the internet, hoping it would just get buried. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I paid him $20 in gas money to come pick me up because I lived fairly far away and figured it was fair. I then paid $45 for dinner plus a $7 tip. Then I brought $25 in shisha to smoke together because he loves it, but he was out of shisha. He then demands bedroom favors in a very aggressive way, and I decline because it was a first date. I wasn't even liking him enough to kiss him. He then did this half-crying thing in which no tears came out, but he was sobbing? So I ended the date right then and there and asked to be driven home. He said he'd drive me home if I did the deed with him. I ended up taking a freaking taxi back. I waited outside his house for 2 hours late at night waiting for the taxi. That's a whole other story of bullcrap. Taxi company kept telling me, "We'll be there in 10 minutes every 30 minutes. Nope, 2 frickin' hours. Anyway, the whole trip together cost me over $200 to have the worst date of my life. For the record, I don't mind paying for gas or dinner, that's fine, but then to treat me like crap afterwards? Screw you, man. I went on a date with this guy who seemed really cool. He used to race bikes until he landed on his head after attempting a jump. During the date, he told everyone we were on a date. Everyone. Told me he wanted to kill his ex-roommates. Asked the waitress to make the date more romantic, so she brought out a giant ice cream sundae meant for 2 people to share, and he ate it all by himself and spilled the ice cream all over his t-shirt in the process. He bragged about beating the world record for that motorbike jump on which he landed on his head. Then he kept asking me if I was a gold digger because he makes tons of money and needs to protect himself. Demanded separate bills. No big deal there, I guess. Then all 4 of his credit cards were declined. He asked me if I didn't mind paying and he'd get it next time. Not that there would ever be a next time from my perspective. He told everyone that the date went splendidly. Then gave me stickers to his welding company as a thank you for paying since his credit cards must have had some kind of error. I mean, maybe the whole falling on his head thing goes a long way towards explaining all of the rest. Apart from the word splendidly, that just means that he's a 1900s landed gentry of some sort. Probably why they disowned him after he got into the vulgar sport of bike racing. I went out for dinner and a movie with a guy, tried to chip in money at both, but he insisted that he'd cover it all. At the end of the night, we were sitting in his car in the parking lot of the restaurant we had just eaten at, and he asks for a down-under kiss, saying, "I mean, I bought you dinner and took you to a movie. It's the least you can do." Thankfully, I lived nearby. I hopped out and walked home. Blind date. He suggested this swanky French restaurant that he said he loved, which thrilled me to my marrow, as I love French food and wine. When we got to our table, I picked up the wine list, and he looked at me with this contemptuous look and said, "I don't drink." So, feeling judged, I ordered water. He then said we should split an entree because the prices here are ridiculous. And I'm thinking, now wait a minute, you picked this place and you said it was your favorite, meaning you knew damn well what the price point was, and if you can't afford it, why didn't we go somewhere else instead? And obviously, I was planning on paying half the check. I don't ever assume a date is going to pay for me, and we'd even joked about that during the phone call a few days previously. So he knew I didn't expect him to pay for me, and I was like, hungry. But I just shrugged. He told me to pick 3 things that sounded good and we'd share one. So I told him my 3 choices, and when the server came back, he ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, which wasn't even one of the things I'd selected. We shared our tiny meal and split the check, $12 each, and the conversation was stilted and awkward. He answered all of my questions with one-word answers. Eventually, I felt like I was just interrogating him, and we sat there in silence. Afterwards, he asked if I wanted to go see some live music at a jazz bar down the road. Thinking optimistically, I agreed. But when we got to the club and he found out there was a $5 cover, he told me we should skip it. Then he said, "I mean, do you really have to do something else, or can we just call it a night?" As though I'd been all high maintenance and demanding. This an hour after I arrived, and I'd driven almost 2 hours to get there. We parted ways and I went off to go dancing with friends instead. So obviously, the dude was flat broke, which I'm not going to hold against anyone. I mean, I've so been there. But if you can't afford a date, maybe you shouldn't. Or just go to Chili's. Chili's would have been fine. Finally, a place to tell this story. I had a very disappointing date in high school. It was the dead of winter, like -40 Celsius. We had gone to a movie and the whole thing was really awkward. She didn't really seem to want to be there, was very detached. After the movie and the bus trip home, she admitted the only reason she even agreed to the date with me is because my friend had turned her down a few days earlier. I wasn't aware of that at the time. That was a pretty big letdown and waste of time. But I figured, whatever, I'll head home and find something else to spend time on. I'll get over it eventually. I got off the bus and just wanted to get home as soon as possible. At the bus stop, there was this thigh-high railing around the front of the nearby parking lot, and instead of walking around it, I decided to step onto it and then over it. The second I stepped onto it, I realized, of course, it was coated in ice. I Charlie Browned the F out. I just flipped in the air, lost everything in my pockets, ripped my pants from butthole to zipper, and then came down hard right onto the railing with my shin, fracturing the thing. It's still -40 out, I can't just lay there till help comes, so I fish around in the snow, grab my stuff, try to stuff my testes back into my pants, and stagger back home. In short, it's not me, it's you, limped home with my family jewels in the wind. We met on a dating website and went to a sushi place for dinner. He was a butthole. He told me this, repeatedly. Almost everything he said ended with, "Look, I know I'm a butthole, but at least I'm honest, right?" First story he tells me is how he's really only joined the dating website to troll people, but then he saw me and thought he'd give going on a real date a shot. Gee, thanks. And all of his other stories were equally awful. Also, I'm pretty sure he literally thought no meant yes and yes meant no. And I don't mean in an unspeakable act kind of way. When we were at the restaurant, he absolutely insisted that I order this one thing. I said no like 5 times, but he kept pushing for it until I ordered it just to shut him up. Then after the dinner, he wanted to go to the mall nearby and hang around. We walked around until we passed this anime and manga store. He asked if I wanted to go in, and I said sure, I like that store. He insisted that I didn't like the store. Said he didn't want to force me to go. I said no, I really want to go in. We went in for like 2 minutes and then he decided he didn't want to force me to do something I didn't want to do and practically dragged me out of there. I didn't call him back after that. I was a barista in a cafe during college and this loyal customer asked me out. Took me to sushi, took me to a bar, and bought me a drink. Conversation was good, nothing spectacular, but he was cute and intelligent and funny. When he took me home, he parked outside of my house and just assumed he's coming in. I'm like, no? Genuinely confused, he asks why not. He says he did everything right. He bought me dinner and a drink, so he should get to come inside and we should do the deed now, because that's how it goes. And then we start arguing about it and I start to worry that he's just going to enter my apartment whether I like it or not. I'm having to literally explain that just because he bought me dinner it doesn't mean I have to F him. Then he puts on a Prince CD to try and get me in the mood, and he actually said, "Here, just listen to this. Prince is hot, right? All girls like Prince." I think I might have run when I finally got out of his car. What was the worst decision you saw somebody else make? I knew a guy who was supposedly recruited to be a part of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, not even out of high school. Then he saw his girlfriend dance with another guy at graduation, and in a fit of drunken jealousy, he punched a brick wall and shattered a dozen bones in his hand. Never played an instrument again. My cousin dropped a full-ride baseball scholarship at a college in a town he grew up in, wanting to move for a girl he started dating his senior year of high school. She was 2 years younger than him. He went to a state school instead that's 40 minutes from his hometown. She cheated on him and they broke up not long after school started. Ouch. A girl I dated for a few years broke up with me for a smack addict/dealer. I told her, "This is going to ruin your life." It's been almost 10 years and I think she's finally staying clean, but she lost a decent job and had some run-ins with the cops, plus got pregnant between stints in rehab. I witnessed my friend kick a skunk in order to get it away from him. Bad decision. I had a family of skunks that lived by my house for a long time. I moved, they're probably still there. They were always very friendly as long as you didn't get too close to the kits or act aggressively towards them. They never let me pet them or anything, but they were perfectly content to chill out on the lawn just a few feet away. And I told that to an idiot cousin who was over one day, and she apparently interpreted that to mean it was okay to try and pet one of the kits. It didn't go quite according to plan. So my fiancé's cousin was donating $50 to Thon. Thon is a fundraiser held by Penn State where they dance for hours and hours to raise money for causes like running a marathon, but dancing. He was donating to a friend and did it with coins hot glued to a cardboard backing, making a big Penn State logo. Cool looking. Well, his girlfriend decided that it was so cool looking that it should be framed. For something that was to be taken apart shortly after it was given. The dabs of glue were small and he'd engineered it to come apart easily, by the way. He was real angry when she bought that frame and they couldn't even return it because it was a custom job. So they ended up keeping it so as to not totally waste the $600, and he wrote a check for $50 for the donation. Now they have a silly framed $650 Penn State logo on their wall, and neither of them even went to Penn State. Oof, well, that was one of those well-meaning, poorly executed loving couples gifts, wasn't it? At least it's implied at the end that they didn't break up over it or anything, and that hopefully at some point in the future they'll be able to laugh it off. Speaking of laughing, some idiot I used to know was convinced pepper in the eye wasn't nearly as painful as people made it sound. We just watched him pour pepper in his open eyes and laughed when the screaming began. A frickin' eyelash in my eye or a speck of dirt has me going, ow, 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 frick. So why on earth would you doubt the painful powers of a spice? I was in Yosemite doing a hike up to the top of, I think, Vernal Falls. Some kid from a large church group decided to swim at the top in the seemingly but not really calm water there. I saw that kid get swept up and taken away over the edge. The water has been running over there for thousands of years, so the rocks are smooth and there's no vegetation. There's literally nothing to grab a hold of if it happens to you. I was not in the mood to see a kid go like that day. Read the signs and please stay the heck out of the water if you're told to. He wasn't found that day, or the next, or the next. I spoke to a ranger and he said that sometimes they don't get to retrieve anything until the summer when the falls have dried up. This is because often those who fall get stuck in a current and get thrown around in one area at the bottom like they're in a washing machine. It's impossible to get to them or even see them. I have no idea what's left of them after months of that. So, yeah, stay well clear of waterfalls, folks. Our English teacher told us about this incident that happened a few years ago. He went to this beach with his family, but it was high tide. The warning flags were up and everything, so they couldn't swim. This lady comes along and lets her 3 kids go into the water. He tries to stop them and tells her it's high tide, but she wouldn't listen and the kids go into the water anyway. Of course, the worst comes to pass and the kids are drowning. My English teacher and a few other men swim out and save the kids while fighting against the tide. When all the kids were saved, he gave the woman a proper scolding. He is a teacher after all. He says it still terrifies him to think what could have happened if the tide had been any stronger. While over at his house, one of my best friends decided on a whim to snort cayenne pepper. For science. It went about as well as you could expect. My idiot friend badly shocked himself trying to light a cigarette with his electric arc stun device. When I was about 7 years old, I was in the car with my parents going across the bridge from Niagara Falls, Ontario to Niagara Falls, New York. The deadly Niagara River is right below. There was quite a wait due to traffic, so we were pretty much stopped. A bunch of teenagers were goofing around, hopping out of their car and play fighting and stuff. One guy hopped up on the railing of the bridge and did a handstand. It was terrifying. His friends yelled at him and he hopped down again. Then he did the same thing and fell over the railing. 30 years later, I still dream about that sometimes. I had a friend ask another friend to shoot him with a blow dart. First, the guy shot him in the leg, but my friend thought that was too easy. He was an overly confident Marine Reserve, so he asked him to shoot him in the side. The guy did, and it punctured a lung, though he wouldn't admit it. He tried to play it cool and decided to go home when he was really going to the hospital. We all followed him to his car, trying to convince him to let one of us drive or call an ambulance, but he just kept saying nothing was wrong. He collapsed right as he unlocked his car, and we had to call 911. He's fine now, aside from his injured ego and dim wits. A girl married her boyfriend the summer after junior year of high school. Then they dropped out and then split up before they were even married for a whole year. I don't always judge people for marrying young, but this was clearly a series of bad decisions. A friend signed with a professional sports organization at 18 years old for $1.2 million and spent 95% of it on junk without putting any of it into an investment fund. We asked my friend why he proposed to his controlling, angry girlfriend of 5 miserable years. I did it so she'd stop asking. The wedding is in 3 months. Ugh. Outside a bar, the bouncers offer to pay for a cab. The guy says no, calls his girlfriend, she won't pick him up because of the baby. He says he won't drive, walks off, gets in his car, does 80 miles per hour down a side road and gets busted for DUI. He was offered a free cab ride home, effed up his life and could have killed someone. This guy, let's call him Sean, was young and had never been with a woman before. He started seeing this married girl that was separated from her husband. He gets some and falls in love immediately. A few months later, her and her husband decide to try and work it out for their kids. Sean can't stop thinking about her, so he figures out a way to get her away from her husband. He walks up to their living room window and caps the husband in the head with a .22 rifle, while he's playing with his 4-year-old daughter. He's doing life for premeditated murder. A girl I know spent $50,000 on a wedding for a marriage that lasted 6 months. 2 of my friends were at a party drinking. Friend number 1 shows off his gat to friend number 2, tells him it's not loaded, points the weapon at his head and pulls the trigger. Forget the years of jail time, he has to live with killing his friend for the rest of his life. I slowed down from 100 km per hour to about 80 on a highway because I saw a large kangaroo at the side of the road up ahead. The young guy behind me revved his car at me and drove really close and held his horn down, obviously annoyed. I'd gently put the brakes on so I couldn't understand what his problem was. He just kept revving too. I put the brakes on again when I saw the roo starting to take off in front of me. It would have safely passed in front of my car until the idiot behind me floored it around my car and absolutely decapitated the poor animal right in front of me. It went up and over his bonnet, rolled down the side of the car, finishing under the back wheel. I saw it bend in half the wrong way. He pulled over further ahead and I drove past him with tears in my eyes. I'm shocked. He had a really nice expensive-looking car and the roo was very big, so I really hope it did some exceptional damage to that loser's car, lest its death be a total waste. Yeah, I mean, this absolutely sucks, but in terms of what happened to the guy's vehicle, I feel like this is tinged with just a little bit of sweet satisfaction. Drive like an aggressive moron? Fine. Have a bucket of offal all over your vehicle and a few grand at a panel beater. Enjoy! A friend of my dad's sold up his house in central London and bought a place in France. 15 acres, swimming pool, 8-bed house, and a smaller house on the side. Problem was that it needed tons of maintenance, lots of repair work, and a small supply of staff just to keep it running. Now, this wouldn't be a problem for a multi-millionaire like the previous owner, but this guy wasn't. He only had the money for the sale of his house, which was dwindling fast. It was also a 50-mile round trip to the local shops and pub. There was no internet and no TV. So he's bored out of his mind and has no company except his missus, and I think the realization of this situation was beginning to set in. People tried to talk him out of it, but sometimes when people get an idea in their head, there's nothing you can say that will change their minds. I can see them trying to sell next year, but I don't think it will go very well. I think the previous owner was glad to be rid of it, to be honest, and I don't know how long he had that up for sale. I was on tour when we played Newcastle in England. Decently big gig for some small-timers like us. When discussing with the hosts, they mentioned that we should go and give the opening act a confidence boost as it was their first ever gig. Went down and met with them. Talked to them and they seemed absolutely confident as hell. Soon discovered that they were an experimental band and that none of the guys had actually played their instruments before. That's right, they'd decided to put a band together of non-musicians, not rehearse, and play on the night thinking that it would make them seem creative and ambitious. It was atrocious and cringy is what it was. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I saw a rookie drinker at a house party mix Snapple with a half glass of Everclear, thinking Everclear was a simple alcohol mixer. 20 minutes later, projectile throw up everywhere. In a redeeming moment, a few hours later, he drunkenly got up from his sleep and decided to haphazardly mop the kitchen and then went back to bed. A guy I knew in the military made enough money during deployment to pay off his student debt. He bought a car instead. I went to a party with a friend and she smoked crystal. I worked in retail in college and met her there. She was really nice and we had the same sense of humor. After a few weeks, she invited me to a house party in the middle of nowhere, and it was like all dudes in their 30s. She was dating one of them, and we were like the only girls. I wanted to leave right away because not only were the people weird, but the house was weird too. Like there were no outlet covers on the outlets, barely any furniture, but there was an exotic dancing pole in the living room. She drove and convinced me to stay for one drink, and when I got back from the kitchen with a beer, she asked me if I wanted to smoke crystal with her. She actually called it something else, but I didn't understand, and only figured it out after she started explaining to me. I declined and then went kind of into shock as she started to smoke it anyway, while her boyfriend started telling me that it wasn't as bad as people think. I ended up calling my boyfriend to come and get me and walking to the main road to wait for him because I didn't really want to be anywhere near that house. The next time I saw her at work, she told me that a few hours after I'd left, a guy who'd been punched at the party had called the cops, and she had been too afraid to go back to her car after running from the house, so she had spent the whole night just walking around in the nearby woods. I quit like 2 months later and never saw her again, but my friend who continued to work there told me a few months after the girl was fired for smoking crystal in the bathroom at work. In high school, I watched a guy who didn't smoke light a cigarette and announce to a crowd of kids that he was going to smoke for 1 month and then just stop, just to show smokers how easy it was to quit. That was like 17 years ago, and he still smokes. Once in middle school, while we were changing after gym class, this one kid decided to steal my Axe body spray out of my locker. He was completely undressed and ran away when I confronted him. As he got to the other side of the locker bay, he hopped up on the bench and, as if to taunt me, sprayed the Axe body spray directly onto the tip of his manhood. It definitely didn't seem pleasant from his reaction. Second-hand story, but here we go. A colleague of a friend of mine came into work excited about having bought a new house. She thought she'd got a great deal because they took like $50,000 off the original price. Why? Because they found out the place was completely infested with termites. Really, all she bought was a very expensive piece of land. And no, she wasn't deceived or misled by the previous owner. She knowingly bought Termite City, thinking that she could turn it around somehow. Oh boy, that's extreme real estate optimism right there. Honestly, the narrator is looking to buy his first place, and stories like this are probably good to read because they're ramping up my skepticism and will hopefully prevent me from befalling a similar fate. 18 years ago, I watched somebody quit their $20 an hour job, and remember this is 2007 money, blow through $25,000 of savings, get ripped off trying to restore a Honda from the 80s, that's where the $25,000 went, lose all their friends, default on all their credit cards, lose their luxury condo, move in with their grandpa, get kicked out by said grandpa, move in with their dad and stepmom, get a new job for minimum wage at their dad's work. And why did all these things happen, you might ask? It was a severe fear of growing up. This isn't speculation, that's literally his reasoning. I saw a guy eat roadkill as part of a dare. Hospitalized for 3 weeks for infection that led to vomiting that Maxilon wouldn't work in that led to a hernia, which led to sepsis. I was in high school, 2 grades under this girl that was graduating in less than a month. She was brilliant and had amazing grades, but she dropped out to become a manager at a Hungry Jack's. That's a chain here in Australia. She ended up getting demoted after a few months because they transferred a new manager in that had 20 years of experience. She could have easily baked the cake and ate it as well, but to this day I can't understand why she'd just drop out like that. Her parents were mad. There was this one incident in my hometown that made me want to tear my hair out. A family moved in a few years ago. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The mother was looking for work as a teacher, but there were no openings, so she worked as an aide. My mother was on the school board at the time, and she noticed that the parents were complaining about the lady, as she was apparently ignoring students and favoring others, getting angry when her children got bad grades from other teachers, stuff like that. My mum invited her to the next school board meeting to discuss the situation, and the lady went nuts. The conversation broke into screaming, and this lady swore she'd take Mum's spot on the board. Sure enough, when election signs went up online, she was the only person who ran against my mum. After months of an attempted smear campaign, my mum won the election with more than 200 votes. That lady only got 5, and all of them were from her extended family. So, what does the lady do? She decides to pull both of her children out of public school as she doesn't want them corrupted by the teachers and the board. The son was a senior in high school, months away from graduation, and the daughter was in middle school. My sister was in her class, and she said the daughter screamed and kicked her mum as she dragged her out of the classroom to check her out, begging her not to do it. She left all of her stuff in her locker, and the school had to send it to them. When Mum heard the news, she was horrified and tried to talk to the family, but the father had been browbeaten by his wife and refused to put the kids back in public. It's been a couple of years since then. The mum homeschooled the kids, but the son works in the oil field and is trying to get his GED. The daughter is a complete rebel and has been arrested numerous times for drunk driving and vandalism. But the mum still has the audacity to act smug whenever someone runs into her at the grocery store. At least my children know how to live in the real world. Sure, Kathy, keep telling yourself that when you have to bail your kid out from jail. My mum didn't even hate her in the slightest, but was very upset that she did this to her kids, who didn't do anything wrong. Both kids were under 18, so the son couldn't just go back to school on his own. Betting $5,000 on 17 on roulette. I saw an entire country elect an uneducated reality TV star as their president once. Well, now twice. Trivia night at the TGIF Fridays. One of the questions was, which band originally wrote and sang While My Guitar Gently Weeps? I said it was the Beatles, but a friend said it was Prince. Cue a bunch of people saying, wait, I think you're right. Yeah, he had that awesome live solo a few years ago. I insisted it was the Beatles, so we put it to a vote. I lost the vote, and we lost that point. Frick you, Gavin. Frick you, team. I watched my brother pre-order No Man's Sky. Luckily, it was only a short-term bad decision. A woman married my ex-husband after she witnessed him snapping my wrist like a twig, carrying on an affair with him for a year of our marriage and knowing full well he was an addict. It was like watching a train wreck. I had to keep repeating to myself that it wasn't my problem. My friend met a girl at a wedding on the last day of a short overseas trip and decided to cancel his flight home the next day and stay in a foreign country with no job, no place to live, barely any money, and a tourist visa, just to try and get with her. This was 5 years ago, and they're engaged now. So I guess the decision was, in a way, the best decision he had ever made. Still seemed really short-sighted at the time, though. My dad watched his best friend for 35 years drink himself into an alcoholic, essentially ruining his own life. They were drinking buddies for a long time, but my dad began to suspect he had a problem and tried to shake him out of it and quit drinking himself too to avoid encouraging him to drink. His best friend's eventual DUIs and increasingly protective wife led to a strain on his relationship with my dad and anyone else he knew from high school or college. Now his wife won't let anybody talk to him ever again. My dad misses him greatly and won't stop telling stories about the antics they used to get up to when they were kids, always addressing him as uncle in the last few years we used to see each other. They started out in the sandbox at age 2 and eventually broke loose in their 30s. My best friend was marrying a girl just because they had a kid together. Everything was working out fine between them as friends, and their daughter, though only 3, seemed happy as hell. Then they started to be friends with benefits and began dating once again. Out of nowhere, they announced that they were getting married. Everyone knew this was a bad idea considering their history and that marriage shouldn't be a thing you just try one day. Anyway, the wedding day comes and it's your typical affair. Church, priest, gown, flower girl, cake, all the usuals. It was an uncomfortable experience for us as his friends, since we felt like it wasn't set to last between the two of them. We didn't know how right we were. 2 months in and they're fighting almost every night. He tells me that anything will trigger a fight between them. One night it comes to a head when their fighting becomes physical. She shoves him, he shoves back, she punches him in the chin, he hits her in the left eye hard, and problem is she's petite and only 5 foot tall, meanwhile he's 6 foot 3 inches, former bodybuilder. She called the cops and had him arrested. She now has full custody of the daughter, and he spent 3 weeks in jail over the whole thing. So much for giving marriage a try. What happens regularly today that would horrify a person from 100 years ago? Fun fact, when the escalator was first introduced, it only went up a few feet, and whiskey was given to calm the nerves of people who tried it. So probably the fact that those exist and they're taking people hundreds of feet into the air. My dad told me my great-grandfather was appalled that a restroom was inside the house. The amount of married couples without kids compared to the amount of unmarried couples with kids, and Germany's position in the world. Oh, if I met a person from 100 years ago, oh, you're from 1925, so World War I is still going on, right? What do you mean, one? Oh, those people would not be prepared for modern movies with CGI realism. Take them to a new horror movie and that would literally horrify them. With no idea what a computer can create visually, they'd have to assume people are getting slaughtered on camera for the entertainment value. I remember reading that back then, people were terrified by the ending of The Great Train Robbery, where the main robber fires his gun directly toward the camera. Access to the most WTF adult material you can find online. 100 years ago is 1925, not long after the Great War, so maybe airplanes? I live near a small airstrip, so I hear light aircraft so often that it's just part of the background noise now. But I imagine that in the dawn of aviation, when planes had been newly used for war, it would be pretty horrific. People running around everywhere half naked for health. Nuclear weapons might horrify them, also seeing how overdeveloped their old homes might be, especially if they had a farm near a city. Hey, do you still use those bombs after we won World War I and bought peace, or did you discard them all? Oh, we made one that could level a city in World War II. I think what's fascinating about theoretical comparisons like this is that there were people who lived through the trench warfare and even straight-up melee cavalry charges of prior conflicts who were seeing atomic bombs by the time they died. Like, holy heck, talk about your world just completely transforming during your lifetime. Air travel. For anyone not thinking that they'd be horrified, I'm including flamethrower-wielding drones with holographic projections of dragons in my air travel response. So, This one, though. I can't imagine the faces of the Wright brothers as they watch an Airbus A380 or a Boeing 787 Dreamliner scream through the sky. Trying to explain jet engines or the more modern turbofan engine, turbofan engines are what's found on most modern large aircraft, they'd crap themselves, especially seeing how easy it's become to fly such massive distances. Electricity fricking everywhere. France and Germany showing each other support and encouragement. Also, people refusing to vaccinate for diseases that used to be widespread and killers. Maybe spending so much money on every grocery shop on food that ultimately gets thrown out. Just food wastage overall, really. I remember my granny telling me a story about when my uncle spilled the jug of cordial everywhere when he was a kid, and she cried all day because it was their treat for the week and it got wasted. My Oma always had a story about how they'd use a chocolate ration during World War I. She was sneaky and would cut 9 pieces of chocolate for her family of 8 so that she could get 2. They'd save all of the breadcrumbs and just scrape the mold off anything, and fruit was a godsend. The Third Reich had taken all of their gold, so my Opa proposed to my Oma using a box of strawberries. They just celebrated their, 75th anniversary? They're 96 and 94. She told us they'd sometimes eat tulip bulbs and grass to fill their stomachs. She always said being overweight was a good thing. Food was a celebration. Show a surgeon from 1918 a Da Vinci surgical robot and watch him lose his mind. Alternatively, tell a surgeon from 1918 the mortality rates of modern surgery. You can pull a device out of your pocket and receive an unsolicited pic of someone's trouser monster. How so many more of the population are fat. My father-in-law comes from a farming family in Minnesota, and he has all of these pictures of past generations hanging up. 3 generations ago, they were a clan of lean, good-looking blondes. The blonde hair has remained, but a lot of them are past 300 pounds now. The juxtaposition is shocking. There are a lot of good points being already made in this group, so I'll add the less obvious things, like being in public without a hat, colorful clothing with logos and slogans, robots, casual swearing, women doing men's work, and loud music everywhere. Discussions of World War II. Imagine knowing you had that coming your way. Oh, they did that on an episode of Doctor Who. A World War I officer was sent to the future due to time shenanigans. When the Doctor meets him, he says, "Looks like you're a World War I officer based on your uniform. And the guy just looks shocked and replies, "What do you mean, one?" Interracial couples. Loving vs. Virginia didn't happen until 1967. Until then, you'd be arrested and run out of town for marrying outside your race. Even in the North, it might not have been illegal, but it was heavily frowned on. I highly recommend people read The Color of Water by James McBride. He details some of the crap his white Jewish mother dealt with by marrying black men in the 50s and 60s in New York City. Fashion. The bikini didn't arrive until the 50s. Imagine being a Victorian lady and seeing a woman in a bikini. Your underwear covers your whole body, so you can't even consider that. And yes, I'm well aware that 100 years ago was only 1925, and I'm well aware that Queen Victoria and thus her era died in 1901. We all know this, thank you for the dozens of corrections. But there were still Victorian ladies living in the 20s, guys, and they would indeed clutch their pearls in despair over what scandalous lows we trollops have sunk to if they ever saw what we wore. Even to bed. I'm lounging around the house in a big t-shirt and having a giggle that this would ever happen. Kinda like how our parents think our shorts are too short. The parents of the 20s kids were appalled at knees showing as well. Enjoy your days, everyone. Black people buying property in your neighborhood. Sadly, my parents still worry about this. They're not scared of black people, they think it'll just make the property value drop. Huh, your parents are racist, dude. Yeah, no crap. Gay marriage. Why not kill two birds with one stone? Interracial gay marriages. Huh, a gay pride parade would give most of them a seizure. Men in space every day. Yeah, we don't travel to the moon anymore, but there are a few men in space regularly now. Oh, and the fact that there are women in space too. That'd be the cherry on the cake. The fact that you said we don't travel to the moon anymore would cause a crazy reaction. The follow-up questions on that last bit. Why don't we go there anymore? Are there monsters? What happened? I asked my grandmother this very question back in 2008. She was born in 1913 and lived to be 96. Without skipping a beat, she said, "The way people treat each other." I was hoping for an answer regarding technological advances, anything other than the brutally honest answer I received. My grandmother was Welsh and Cherokee. She married a Lebanese man. She wore pants. She was a nurse. She and my grandfather had friends of many races and faiths. It wasn't always easy for them, but they were close, and their friends were close. She told me families aren't as close anymore, people don't know their neighbors, people have little regard for others and their safety. She talked about speeding through neighborhoods with children and how everyone was always in a hurry today. She didn't like the internet, and she said it put even more distance between people. I really believe she had some valid points. The amount of excess we have around us and the amount of things we throw away. We spend tons of money on crap food and clothes we don't need. Even just one generation back, my mum told me to stop buying my kids toys and I'm spoiling them. They get toys on birthdays and Christmas and that's it. She said they don't need a new Lego pack, they need imagination to use the older packs differently and to go outside. I completely agree, my sons are a little spoiled, but I usually stop buying in August to prepare them for Christmas. I still feel really guilty for all the excess. I need to donate some toys. Being on the other side of the world in a few hours compared to it taking weeks to travel that far 100 years ago. Heavy metal. Just imagine Edith being horrified when James Hetfield is screaming, "Master! Master!" My browser history. You don't need to go back 100 years for that to horrify someone. Probably how much people swear these days. Words like hell and damn were considered profane once upon a time. Compared to some of the stuff you hear on the radio nowadays, it's all incredibly quaint in retrospect. I don't believe this to be true. When you read anything from that time, it's written in a mode acceptable to everyone, and most usually by someone we'd now think of as an educated mid to upper middle class person. At least, and that's for want of a better term. My granddads were both born around 1900. One was a docker and from Scotland, and the swearing like a docker phrase seems real. The other one was a master shoemaker, which was a really highly skilled job back then, and spoke and wrote like a gent his entire life. Shaved private parts. Social media and people broadcasting parts of their life online for people to see. I don't know, the local newspaper from my hometown is all online and it goes back like 125 years. It's mostly stuff like, the L.R. Smith family had Mr. and Mrs. Wilson over to their farmstead for dinner last Sunday, and a wonderful time was had by all. The Lutheran Church muffin and cookie social was well received, and over $13 was raised for the local baseball team. It's all stuff like that. I don't think they had much real news. The amount of skin seen in today's fashion. Being brutally honest here, Irish, Black, Native American, Asian, and Hispanic people being allowed to speak on equal terms with German, British, and other Europeans. I'm not even kidding. At the turn of the 20th century, none of those groups had any rights in the US. After 1918, people weren't crazy about the Germans for some reason either. LGBT and interracial couples getting married. People driving vehicles 60+ miles per hour, not to mention that we do it every day within constant close proximity to one another and being killed on the daily by it. Our grandchildren will think of this as the Wild West where people were allowed to drive around willy-nilly. Didn't you crash into each other all the time? Well, yeah, kind of. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Contacting people every minute of the day through cell phone or social media. It's not terrible if you like people. My grandmother can't fathom how easy it is to stay in touch with my sister now that she lives overseas, and regularly recalls when she herself moved overseas in the 50s and got one letter from her mother once a month. I'm not necessarily sure this would horrify them, just deeply offend them at the least. It really depends on what kind of person it is. If it's a World War I vet, then probably getting into a German car or eating a German sausage. If it's a conservative housewife from the South, then either walking down the street and seeing African American people, or watching some adult movies. I think if I had a person from 100 years ago, I'd take them to a museum and hear their point of view on some of the objects there, because they'd have more experience with using them or seeing them. The divorce rate. Also, not going to church. Saying no to your parents. Going south of the border on your partner. I imagine they smelled worse back then. I feel like the following scene could occur with a 100-year-old time traveler. Welcome to the modern kitchen. Ah, it's very mechanical, but I see an icebox to keep perishables cold, an oven to bake breads, even what appears to be an electrical Dutch oven to slow-cook meats. Yes, I understand the functional side of what's happening here. Tell me though, what's this switch for? Oh, it operates a set of blades that spin at high speeds at the bottom of the basin. Instant loss of limb if you were to insert your hand. The frick you talking about? Well, most parts of the world don't use incinerators, so it implies that Europeans traveling forwards to the respective kitchens in their parts of the world wouldn't be as mind-blown. I guess it really depends on how many marital aids are suction-cupped to one's fridge. The government monitoring your online activity 24/7. While the internet is recent, just the thought of being spied on might be enough. Obama. Well, there's a lot in that. Black president, Hawaii is a US state, offspring of interracial marriage. A black metal or death metal gig, and any realistic video game. Ankles. Oh, come on, man, they had ankles, they just didn't have knees. This is specific to the United States because most other countries aren't like this. How homelessness and vagrancy and free living are criminalized and corralled today. It's illegal to simply live on one's own without IDs or forms or birth certificates. You can't even work legally without IDs and registrations and tax reports, and so the usual laborer or hobo lifestyle choice is no longer possible. You can't hunt or fish for free in the United States, you need permits. Legally, even living on the barter system off-grid is illegal, as you must claim income received in kind. You can't sleep in the open, under a bridge or in an abandoned building, or anywhere else uninhabited except for a national forest, and even then only for 3 days at a time. And even then you're monitored by the NFS to ensure that you don't have a campfire. You can't just disappear and start your life over again for any reason. You can't change your name except through the courts. In the United States, we also don't have the right to roam the land freely. You want to become a tinker or junkman? The permits and restrictions are prohibitively expensive for professions that used to be a working refuge of the poor, the mentally ill, or the eccentric. If it's not a 9-to-5 job in an office or a crap job at a fast food place, then screw your lifestyle. You'll be measured and sorted. But the worst thing from the perspective of the 1920s is how it's no longer possible, to the point of being demonized and criminalized, to extend normal human kindness to the poor and the vagrant. In some cities, it's illegal to run mobile soup kitchens, mobile showers or laundries, or take people in without incurring the wrath of permits, code enforcement, and chambers of commerce. I study that period, and in particular I pay attention to the folks on the margins of society. I live in a rural area where we face an increasingly transient population fleeing the cities. And today we want those margins and the people in them erased. It's barbaric to allow people to starve. It's savage to prohibit them from making their own way and thus forcing them to starve. And it's unthinkable that we've compensated for our own lack of compassion by barring others from having any of their own. Our disposable culture. Everything's individually packaged and the packaging thrown away. Many things are made like crap and then thrown away when they inevitably break. Food is uneaten and thrown away. No one maintains anything. If you look at clothes, shoes, or household goods from 1918, they're really good quality. The way people treat each other, particularly when dating, lateness, ghosting, all those things. Dear Diary, I was receiving a letter each week from Eunice, but 2 months have passed since our last correspondence. I do believe I've been ghosted. Interracial marriage. After all, Jim Crow laws were enacted 180 years ago. Women taking part in sporting events like bicycling and marathons. Billy Fleming was born in 1914, so he would have been like 11 years old. Also, drinking German beer in America. There was a huge backlash around it, and it was one of the steps leading to the 1920s Prohibition era. The entire notion that women are allowed to pursue lives that don't revolve around being the property of men. I mean, today several billion people still can't fathom that idea. Minor infections of wounds. You can generally treat these at home pretty easily. Widespread use and knowledge of antibiotics wasn't really a thing until after 1940. Men kissing other men in public. Started watching Downton Abbey, so I think they'd be surprised at how much the class system has changed. New money is cooler than old money. Parents being able to vaccinate their kids against diseases that would have killed them back in the day, yet refusing to do so. The way we pamper and worship our pets. What about Egypt, man? They literally worshipped kitties. And the cats have never forgotten this. We spend a lot of our day telling a robot that we are not a robot. Transgenders, drag queens, cross-dressers, and more of this stuff that I don't even know what it's called. The EU would give people heart attacks. I mean, it's 1925, the League of Nations is a thing back then. It would probably shock them that the British government is so cavalier about giving it all up, though. Yes, I think most Europeans of 100 years ago would be pretty freaking ecstatic about the recent peace and international cooperation in what's historically been a competitive and violent region. After sending an entire generation to die in the trenches, most European countries were doing their best to avoid it happening again. Yeah, honestly, at least a lot of the more educated folks back then might feel some satisfaction at a job well done, until they realize that the one country they really hate is in the Union too, and then you'd probably hear some grumblings. Oh, and these comments were written before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Furry conventions. I mean, those are scary today. Honestly, the current state of the day's superpowers back then, the UK and France. Your life all over in some weird public mess called the internet. The quality of life is higher in large cities than the quality of life in the suburbs or rural towns. Cuycut, the John D. Rockefeller estate, is located far outside the boundaries of New York City. Cuycut and Rockefeller Center are 30 miles apart. Bill Gates, on the other side, resides in Medina, which is only a 10-mile drive from downtown Seattle. It's horrifying in a positive sense. Sickness and how it was approached, especially in regards to children. I found a news article about my grandfather yesterday. He was about 2, and somebody had to report to the health department that he was sick, so they sent an agent out to inspect him. If the health agent found him to be sick, the whole family would be put on mandatory quarantine. Luckily, he'd made a miraculous recovery by the time the health agent showed up. Details about which kids in the neighborhood were sick were posted in the newspaper. It really served as a reference point for parents. If you knew that your Sally usually played with the Fleming kids, and the Fleming kids were down with scarlet fever, you'd be keeping a sharp eye on how Sally was feeling. Plastic surgery. If you were a rich person from back then, the peasants having rights, I guess. And I've made the mistake of not clarifying that I came at this from a global perspective. For most people living in the 1920s, you were poor and not politically well represented, so they ended up with no rights. The Russian Revolution only happened in 1917, and peasants weren't treated well in many other parts of Eastern Europe. Asian countries also had a huge proportion of peasants until later in the 20th century. How children are allowed to act nowadays in school and in everywhere else. A colored world that isn't a black and white one. That would freak the frick out of me. Access to information. I mean, back then, if you wanted to know something, you had to hope your library had a book on it, or that you knew someone who knew it. Now we can literally ask nearly any question to the small box in our pocket and get an immediate answer. The fact that England let go of the colony in India because one guy threatened to starve himself. Oh, come on, dude, that's not why they did it. Gandhi was locked up in prison for most of the war and became irrelevant in the independence movement. The UK was bankrupt and couldn't hold on to two massive populations who wanted their own countries in India and Pakistan. Any news of well-armed militia or insurgency just because of how little people can do? This wouldn't be too surprising. The French Revolution wasn't a too distant memory, and World War I was started by a terror group dissatisfied with foreign occupation. This is not a modern development by any means. Being fired for a comment you made 10 years ago. Facebook listening to your conversations. Man, some of you really think 1925 was the Middle Ages, huh? All the fat people and vegans. Presidential tweets. Let's see. Women wearing bikinis, women voting, women wearing pants, women wearing shorts, women working outside the home, women buying homes without a father or brother or husband co-signing, women having bank accounts, women running for office, women playing sports, women owning businesses, women being in supervisory positions to men, and women eschewing marriage and children. Also, women being surgeons. Anti-vaxxers. Could you imagine hearing about a cure for stuff like polio, tuberculosis, measles, mumps, rubella, or chickenpox? Then hearing about people not wanting that? 100 years ago isn't that long ago. But it was like living in a minefield of incurable, crippling diseases. Touched a doorknob, then my face. Guess I'm coughing blood for no reason. Gender reassignment surgery. Twerking. When did a cop decide, nope, not worth it, and to just sit this one out? My mum's ex-husband is a cop, and my brother asked him one time what he does when he's shooting radar and a sport bike flies by going like 100+ miles per hour. And he said, absolutely nothing, never gonna catch that guy. And he said most other officers do the same thing. This is the unwritten rule at my local county sheriff, you don't pursue sports bikes. It will only end in them gone or dead and the cops to blame by the public. There's a video posted about a decade ago of some Australian cops chasing a couple of offenders on foot. One of them is about to get nabbed, but then runs into croc-infested water. You can almost hear the cop thinking, yeah, nah, not worth it, as he stops at the edge of the water and watches the guy run away. Awesome footage. There was a known, violent, mentally ill person named Chop in the neighborhood I worked in. As a rookie, I got a call of a prowler cutting through someone's yard near a cemetery. It's very dark and foggy. I pulled up to the area, spoke with the caller, and she described Chop. Chop was known to sleep in the cemetery and wander about during the night. If left alone, he usually just went on his way. Well, being a rookie, I had to find this guy and see if he needed help or was a danger to the public. I was shining lights all around and I finally saw Chop standing next to the fence, with a hole in said fence leading into the cemetery. Chop is huge, by the way, both in height and breadth. I call for an additional unit, only to be told that backup was a way off. I exit the car, staying close to it, and I notice that Chop has a 40-ounce bottle in one hand and a box cutter in the other. I think to myself, well, if he attacks me, I'll probably have to shoot him. I announce myself, and Chop begins screaming, just starting at me with the rage of a psychotic. He then makes a fist and shatters the bottle he's holding in his hand, then proceeds to start muttering and just crawl through the hole in the fence into the cemetery. I got back into my car and pulled back in service. Angel dust is an ongoing problem in my city. It turns people into the Incredible Hulk, in which nothing works in taking them down, more or less. Once there was an undressed man in the middle of our busiest street with a broadsword. We literally had to circle him and shoot him with pepper spray, rubber bullets, beanbag bullets, and tase him at the same time to get him to drop said sword. On average, it takes 6 officers to arrest one man on angel dust if the man is angry. This guy took about 10 cops working together to arrest him. I sat in my squad car and sipped my coffee, as I've had many encounters with these users and I have my own battle scars. They say the only way to fight angel dust is with more angel dust. My god, there would be literally nothing worse than law enforcement officers turning into deranged super soldiers this way. Do not go taking this seriously because frankly, I don't want to be mulched into a wall by a cop who's decided he needs a little something something to get me for an unpaid free riding charge on my train. Oh, I remember one where I was the victim of the noper. A call came across the radio for an accident where both parties were now fighting and getting confrontational with the officer who had come on scene. So my partner and I rolled over, we got both parties separated, and it's obvious the one driver is DUI, so we hand her off to another officer to be arrested. And he proceeds to hand us the driver's passengers. 4 5 to 8-year-old girls and 1 full-on baby. I will never forgive that sneaky mother effer. So we arranged for another caretaker to come and get these little moppets and bundle them into the back of our car. Well, you'll be shocked to learn that the children of mothers who drive drunk are not the most well-behaved little angels. Plus, the baby just begun wailing at the top of its lungs. So my partner takes the baby and a bottle that he salvaged from the crash in an attempt to calm it. I'm in the driver's seat trying to separate 4 screaming monsters through a partition. Also, I don't know any names, so it was a lot of, Abigail? Is it Abigail? Stop pulling Sarah's hair? Zoe? Don't touch that taser, it's not a toy. And so on and so forth. At about this time, our supervisor rolls by the scene. He pulls up next to the car, takes one look at the baby snuggled quietly in my partner's arm as he coos to it, then turns to me as I'm trying to separate 2 ponytailed badges in iCarly shirts, damn near losing an eye in the process. I could physically see the nope pass across his face, and he drives by without a word. My trainee and I were sent on a self-deletion call. We get there, and this poor lady is screaming about her adult son, begging for help between sobs. We run into the house, and the guy is lying somewhat peacefully on his bed, with an empty prescription bottle beside him, prescribed 2 days ago. 50 pills all gone. Yeah, it's too late for him. Apparently the guy had some health issues and decided to check out by downing the entire bottle. The mum finds him hours later, and rigor had already set in by the time we got there. As I'm inspecting the scene and trying to be delicate as I'm teaching my trainee, the mom insists on hovering right over her son, telling me to do whatever I have to do. Well, part of the job is to check all dead bodies for signs of foul play. By now, my partner has arrived, and I instruct my trainee to help my partner roll the guy over to check for other wounds or anything suspicious. Now, mum is standing beside the bed, my partner and my trainee are trying to roll over a very stiff, and I'm standing by the foot of the bed. As the body rolls, the dead guy farts. Loudly. Epic toot, really. Before I could say anything, I learned what these guffs from a dead body smell like. Let me preface this by saying I've smelled horrible things in my career before. Disgusting houses, gross people covered in number 2, other deader people, and nothing compared to the dead guy butt blast. I gagged and very nearly threw up on the bed and ran out of the house. I refused to go in, as every time I got near the door I started gagging. The worst part was, I found it funny afterwards, and the poor mum was just walking around covering her face with a tissue she was simultaneously trying to wipe her eyes with and breathe through. I noped that and made my partner and trainee handle the gassy gentleman. In short, dead guy farts will haunt you. I was walking a footbeat alone when I was about to walk down a dimly lit alley. As I did, all I could see was our local skinhead and weirdo standing in the middle of the alley with nobody else around. He had on suspenders with spikes on them, a tank top and red pants that had a dozen or so chains attached from the belt to his lower pant cuffs. I watched him stand there as he spun back and forth so his chains would bounce against him and make a loud noise. He did that for several minutes without stopping to look around. I was like, nope, and I backed the F up and left. I was with my field training officer on what I think was my second week in training when we got a call for a self-deletion. It was in the middle of August in the south, and we arrive and park in front of the house. We step outside and immediately just smell death. This guy had strung himself up in a barn and decided to tell nobody about his plan to end things. So he's been marinating on the August heat for 2 weeks before somebody smelled him. We walk inside and my partner points out that 2 rats are eating chunks out of his eyes and tells me to get up there and shoo them away. I find a ladder nearby and grab a stick, and then I lose my balance and grab the nearest thing. It's this gentleman's rotting body, and apparently the weight of both of us couldn't be supported by the beam. So I land on my back and his entire bloated body lands on top of me and ruptures open from his stomach. I had his smell on me for what seemed like months, and ever since then I won't deal with crap like that anymore. In short, rotting body lands on top of me. Ugh. This was by far my biggest nope. Years ago, before I went to patrol, I worked as a CO at the local jail. It was common practice to strip search persons going into the main jail. This one person comes into the back. He's about 6'3" and weighs about 350 pounds. The procedure was to have them remove their undies, turn around facing away from the officer, and squat and cough. This would result in anything shoved up their butt to come out. There was this one story about a female and the projectile pill case that came out of her hoo-ha, but that's a whole different story. This one guy hands me his undies, and I swear they felt like they weighed 5 pounds. If you've never seen fat guy tighty-whities, they are quite large. However, this specific pair of undies was coated in pure number 2. It was like somebody had covered the entire backside of his undies with a 1/4 inch of crap and spread it over the undies. Mind you, I have these duty-covered decks in my hand and I'm holding them by the band in pure revulsion. This guy did his squat and cough. He could have had a private jet up his butt for all I knew because I was in my please do not throw up mode. Normally we give soiled clothes to the trustees to be washed. I told the trustee that the underwear needed to be thrown out, and nope, he insisted that I give them back. I gave them back to this guy and he put them back on. Full-on gag reflex kicking into overdrive now. I just wanted this guy away from me. He put on his jail overalls and went into the back. He could have had a pound of smack hiding in the crap covering his undies for all I know, and I did not care. I get shivers down my spine thinking about it. I have seen some horrid stuff in my job, but that is the one that sticks with me. Well, that was a lovely read. I assume that this is why you switched to patrol jobs instead, where you only had to deal with people occasionally trying to kill you. If that's the case, thank you for simultaneously fulfilling the criteria and making me not want to live on this planet anymore. Well, I had the honor of sharing a nope experience with an officer. So a few years back, my teammates and I were heading home from a paintball tournament in Waukegan, Illinois. Waukegan isn't the safest of towns, but we felt comfortable enough to have the car windows down and enjoy the breeze after a long day of paintball combat. Traffic was heavy, so we were able to take in all the beauty that Waukegan had to offer. As our car begins to accelerate on a green light, my eye catches something out of the ordinary in my peripheral. In the middle of a field near a strip mall was a brown electrical pole. This particular pole had the great misfortune of being crapped on by a large, disheveled woman. A stream of doo-doo was bouncing off the pole as if it had a target on it. She did not give an F. I mean, she was projecting an F, but she was just doing it in full view of a strip mall and hundreds of cars. I'm still silent at this point. I couldn't possibly form a word. A teammate screams, "Is she crapping on a fricking pole?" And I'm staring in disbelief as a police car slowly rolls by in the opposite lane. The cop sees the woman, brakes sharply for a moment, then stoically looks forward and presses his nope pedal to get the F out of there. Thanks for the memories, Waukegan. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My father was a cop. His nope stories are as follows. There was a green herb dropout who was ditching class. Dad spotted him and gave chase. They hit the woods. Dad is not a fat cop and is catching up. In desperation, the kid shucks off his $300 black leather jacket. It's in my father's size. He stops, collects the jacket, and lets the idiot continue his terror-fueled sprint through palmettos and spiderwebs. And the second story, I forget this kid's offense, probably fighting or more green herb. Hot pursuit through the halls, up the stairs. The kid charges towards the second-story railing, and without a pause, soars over the edge. He hit the ground with a frickin' stuntman roll and came out of it running. Dad didn't even bother trying to find out who that kid was. In his words, "That was amazing. That motherfricker deserved freedom." Anytime a person had a dog in the car. Not because I was afraid of dogs, but because department policy dictated that after an arrest, the vehicle was to be towed and the only option is to send the animal to the pound. I was not going to be responsible for someone's pet getting euthanized so the city could have its revenue. I heard this one at work today. A colleague was offered a rock-paper-scissors contest to get out of a speeding ticket, and she won. I was part of a nope-out by two of the coolest cops I've ever met. This past winter in Minnesota, my friend and I were out drinking. One friend, Jack, proceeded to get blackout blotto and wanted to do snow angels in the middle of my university's academic mall. Two cops came by and asked if we had been drinking. We were all underage, and we admitted that we had. Instead of giving us a minor consumption ticket, they said they didn't want to disturb Jack, who'd made about a dozen or so snow angels and was oblivious to the fact that the police were there. Okay, I'm not a cop, but one night I was assigned to work the late shift at a grocery store. If things were slow, I'd sometimes chat with the security guard and hang out in the back room until a customer came in. Well, on this particular night, we're both just sitting back, chilling as usual when we hear the store's door open. I stand up and get ready to head to the cash register when I feel the guard grab my arm as he points to the monitor. This huge guy in a black vest had just stormed in and he looked absolutely furious. We stare at the monitor and see him head right to the kitchen utensils section. He grabs the biggest carving knife on the shelf and shoves it underneath his vest before heading back toward the door. At this point, I look at the security guard and he looks right back at me and says, "There is not a chance in hell I'm going out there, kid." This guy charged out the door with a knife, and that was that. We notified the police, but I don't know if he ever got caught. About 3 months ago, I was on foot chasing a guy for a burglary warrant. We were on the second floor of a sleazy motel running towards the dead end. I thought for sure I had him, but nope. He jumped right over the railing onto the blacktop, and without even so much as a slight stumble, he kept booking it through the parking lot. I stopped and just watched him run through the parking lot and down the street, and I said to myself, not even mad, that's just impressive. My 60-year-old uncle is a cop in Chicago, and he used to work beats in the crappy areas of the city. For whatever reason, I once asked him how many people he arrested for DUIs in a week. 0, he said. I was pleasantly surprised and asked him why that was. Is it the good public transport? DUIs becoming more stigmatized? No. He tells me, "I don't have time to arrest drunk drivers because of all the murders, unspeakable acts, and robberies we have to deal with. If I see someone driving drunk with a gat on their windshield, maybe then I'll pull them over." Honestly, this is sort of refreshing in one sense. In my home country, we had a real issue of police ignoring very serious crimes because they were laser-focused on speeding tickets and other finable offenses that made them or the city money. So although it's annoying that Barbara was risking everyone else's lives driving after one too many vodka tonics, it is a good thing that the cops were prioritizing the more serious crimes here. I used to stop this 17-year-old kid quite often and would always smell green herb in his car. After a while, I started smelling farts. From then on, it just wasn't worth stopping that little stinker. My dad is a cop, and just last week there was a large, shirtless black man on some sort of substances. Well, my dad's co-worker wanted to tackle him to the ground. Bad idea, because it was across the road from a school that was about to be let out. Well, a crowd was forming because it was mildly entertaining to watch this guy who was on some sort of hallucinogens. On the way in, the man pulled off his pants and out came the Black Mamba. Well, his colleague tackled the guy from around the waist. My dad said, "Screw it," and let his co-worker do the dirty work as that guy handcuffed him while his head was wrestling the dark sledgehammer. He wasn't going to get into that. My dad just didn't want any part of what was going down, and honestly, I can't blame him either. Also, on his first day on the force, his training officer tried to trick him into touching a dead guy's meat cleaver as well. Oof. I was a rookie, maybe 6 months out on the street, doing foot patrol in a very bad neighborhood. I walked down the street and heard a noise from the nearby alleyway. I walked down the alleyway and turned the corner where I see a man sitting there with a bottle in his hand. I walked up to him, asked him if he was alright, and he looked up at me. His face was full of weeping sores and boils, and his teeth were black and rotten. He looked up at me and said, "I have acquired immunodeficiency syndrome." "Okay," I said, "do you need to go to a hospital or can I call an ambulance for you?" "Do you want it? I can give it to you too if you want." I could not have gotten out of that alleyway faster. In short, a homeless guy wanted to give me acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Nope. My tattoo artist told me about a guy on angel dust ripping the bolted chair from the floor, walking outside and proceeding to sit on it in the middle of the street. He thought the shop was too warm and wanted her to come outside to do his tattoo out there. The police got called and the guy got taken away. It was 2 a.m. I was a Baltimore patrolman just doing a standard drive-through of a poorly lit parking lot somewhere in West Baltimore. My partner says, "What the frick? Check this out." It was some pretty-faced drunk in a cheap suit effing some tight-dressed blonde on his car's hood. We hit him with the spotlight. The guy looks up from railing this broad, reaches down and holds up his badge. CID. Homicide. What a piece of crap. I work for the TSA. I would have liked to nope out of patting down the man who'd just peed his pants. There's no noping at the TSA, however. And for your information, I was wearing gloves, as is required, so at least there's that. My partner and I made a stop on a car coming out of an area full of clubs and bars. My partner walked up to the driver's side and I walked up to the passenger side of the vehicle. The passenger of the car was passed out cold in the front seat. My partner asked to see the driver's license, insurance, and registration. The driver opened up the glove box, and that's when the passenger opened her mouth and projectile hurled into said glove box and onto her friend's arm. I turned around and walked about 10 feet away from the car. I can't stand throw up. I didn't hear the conversation or see the rest of the spewing in the car, but apparently it got real ugly. That's what my partner told me anyway. I could see the look of disgust on his face while he watched the passenger just hurl her guts all over the front of the vehicle and the driver as well. I then saw the passenger door open and the passenger fall face first onto the pavement, covered in her own stomach contents and just laying there moaning. I yelled at my partner to tell the driver to get out of the car and take care of her friend. So while the driver was taking care of her friend, I got a little closer. The driver decided she needed to scoop some of the sludge out of the passenger seat before she puts the passenger back in the car. I was lucky enough to dodge the incoming chunks of nastiness. I just walked back towards the patrol vehicle and had a talk with my partner. He told me that the driver had a suspended driver's license and he thought she had been drinking as well, but he'd actually have to investigate to see if she was drunk. If we impounded the car or arrested the driver, we'd have to take the passenger for public intoxication. 2 girls in the back of our patrol vehicle covered in one person's throw-up, and my partner and I both agreed, no way. We told the driver to get home, drive safe, and obey every rule of the road, and that she was lucky she wasn't getting the car impounded, and that she wasn't going to jail this time. We drove away with lights and siren and didn't look back. Well, I think you're pretty crappy cops for bailing on your responsibilities like that, but can I say for certain that I would have wanted the world's most disgusting human fountain in my car? Not really. So you get bad karma, and because of your job you should have done it, but that judgment also comes with a "glad it wasn't me" qualifier. I was sent a domestic standby call for a mother who wanted to get her kids back from her ex-husband. Basically, this is a call where you stand by while the mother or a father of a child pick up their kid from the other parent to avoid an argument or worse. We knocked on the door of the father, and the man who answered had his shirt off, and tattooed across his chest was, "Life is for players, B-word." Now, mind you, these letters were gigantic. They weren't the tiny little writing sort. This guy was a monster. We kindly asked the good sir to bring his daughter to the front so the mother could take her home. Fortunately, he did agree, but all I could think was, how in the F are we going to tase this guy if he decides to go sideways? Anyway, the daughter was safe, and I now have a bottle opener that says, "Life is for players, B-arch," in memory of that guy. Foolproof plan to avoid being picked up for DUI? Make sure you drive with a dog at all times. Hide your firearms. Have a fart ready to go on cue, and try to keep your warrants below 5. Easy. What happened when a male donor met their child later on in life? So I'm not the dad, but the kid. My bio dad donated his swimmers and gave permission to be identified. Didn't even have to be after 18. I'm counting, because we're not sure if we found all of us yet, that there are 53 half-siblings, all of which are his kids. My full sister and I didn't know we were donor babies until I was a freshman in college and her a junior in high school. It was a few more years before we found out the scope of our family. As such, I never got to meet the man as he passed away in 2018, but I've been getting to know my half-siblings and I'm sad to have missed him. He apparently engaged in annual reunions and was interested in getting to know all of the kids if they and their families were open to it. We all support each other basically by default, even though we didn't grow up together. What's even wilder about him is that he got national coverage for something besides his giant flock of offspring. The guy got married to a woman the day he met her as a competition to be his bride in the Mall of America. It was apparently a heartfelt story, and the two of them had a 20-something-year marriage with 4 kids that they raised themselves. The Mall of America even has a plaque with his name on it, so you can go find him if you really try. The man was a weirdo, but in the best way. He was kind and generous with his time, and really seemed to care about all of his kids, or at least the ones he knew about. I was donor conceived along with my sister, same donor. I had a great dad who raised me and never had any desire to find out who my donor was, but I was always curious about my siblings, especially when I learned there's no legal limit on how many children you can father when you donate swimmers in the US. Well, one 23andMe test later, and the first result at the top of the list is a half-sister in Texas. We got in contact, realized we had a ton in common, and it sparked a fire in her to find more siblings. She took an ancestry DNA test, and at the top of that list was a man in California, listed as father. She got in touch with him right away, and it turns out he's a fantastic guy. He was adopted himself and also got in contact with his birth mum as an adult, so he had been on our side of the situation and he was very open and willing to talk. His wife has been super supportive of us meeting as well. He has 3, organically made kids of his own. I was especially ecstatic to learn that I'm a big sister. Plus, we've since found 3 more half-siblings who've all been very cool and excited to find each other. At this point, I've met all but one of them in person, and I got to meet my biological grandmother as well. In short, I went from having a dad and 1 sibling to having 2 dads and 8 siblings over the span of a couple of years. It's been pretty cool. A guy I know in his 70s got a call from a guy in his 50s saying, "Hey, I'm your son, and I just learned I have a genetic disease, so your other kids should probably get tested." You know what? Good on that guy for looking out for everyone in his unusual circle. Didn't have to do that. It's got to be an awkward conversation for the 70-year-old though, having to reach out to literally everyone, potentially the dozens of kids he's had. I donated for 6 months in university, twice a week. I gave consent to be contacted. That was close to 20 years ago now. I did call and ask once. My swimmers resulted in 24 successful pregnancies. That was all the office could tell me. I've not done 23andMe or anything like that. I think it's better to respect these people's privacy. My aunts had to get a donor for both children, and he happened to live in the same neighborhood. I can't remember if that was a coincidence or not, but he's a close family friend now. He comes over for their birthdays and other family events. They don't refer to him as their dad, really, only as a joke, but he's very close with our family. My younger bro donated multiple times unbeknownst to me. Years later, my wife and I did Ancestry.com to get an idea of how diverse our backgrounds were, and wham! Started getting contacted by lots of people, over a dozen, saying we were close relatives. At first, I was confused and asked the early ones about their parentage. They all had similar stories. Single mom went to a bank. Didn't take too long to guess what had happened. I called my brothers and asked. Younger one fessed up and said yes, he went multiple times. In fact, they told him he needed to stop donating because there was a statistical probability his progeny could meet and date. At least, they seemed ethical. I asked if it was okay if I give them his contact, and he was fine with it. The weird thing is that they all had his face. Like one look at them and it was obvious who their father was. Anyway, this went on for a couple of years and they all connected with each other. Seems like there's over 20 now, probably more. He's met a couple, but it was all casual. The whole thing is super weird to the rest of the family to have all of these close relatives who somehow are a part of the family, but then again, not really. I was donor conceived. I took a DNA test, his natural-born daughter took a DNA test as well. So really, neither of us gave permission. There are 28 siblings so far. It was quite a shock. I wasn't expecting it and I didn't know. I was 38. I've met the donor and most of the half-siblings. He's a cool guy. I think it's eerie how I see many of my mannerisms in him and the other siblings. I know there's a wide range of emotions for people who experience this sort of thing, but for me it was generally positive. At my job, we did a media interview with a guy who donated at least once a month for the money throughout most of his 20s for nearly 10 years. He recently found out that there's a Facebook group with over 100 women from all over the world that have had children from his donated swimmers. This was an interview about his whole story, not a job interview where it just randomly came up. It was for an internal video made for TV execs and writers to potentially create a TV show based off his story. Okay, obligatory warning, it's not me, but I don't think I'll get another chance to tell the story. An ex-girlfriend of mine had an uncle who'd donated back in the 90s. At some point, he started to reach out to the parents of his biological children to see if they wanted to meet their bio dad, and now, every summer, he flies out all of the children who wanted to be in contact to Yosemite, California for a week of camping. I remember the first and only time I went, I was shocked to know that at least 10 of his kids came every year from all around the US to spend time with him for 1 week. Apparently, the year I went with them was also the year that another one of his bio kids got in contact with the uncle for the first time and spent the week out near Yosemite with all of her half-brothers and sisters. I don't keep in contact with the uncle or my ex anymore, but I can assume that more of his children have contacted him each year so they can spend time getting to know their bio dad. Not me, but a friend of my father-in-law. The guy is 86 and he's been dealing with cancer for decades. He lost the will to live until one day he got a call from his supposed daughter. He was a donor in the 70s and with Ancestry.com they were able to reconnect. They were so sweet and have totally involved him with their lives. He has grandchildren that he didn't know about and an entire family when he thought he'd die alone. It's just a beautiful story. I get happy whenever I hear it because he's such a nice man. Funnily enough, he's been cancer-free almost exactly since they connected. They do say attitude is a huge recovery factor. I'm a child born via donation. At one point in my life, I did tons of research to find him. I also did Ancestry.com and I found some half-siblings, but no donor. But I thought about it more and looked over the records I did have from my donor company. He was a college student at the time and asked not to be contacted. He probably has a family now who may or may not know about his past donation, and my gut feeling is that he did it for the money, so I've decided to let it go. I'm a donor child, but the man did not give permission for me to get in touch. I've always been a bit curious, particularly as we now do the same job, but more about any family history of disease which I think might be relevant, although I assume nothing major or he wouldn't have been able to donate. I think I would have reached out when I was 19 or 20, but I wouldn't anymore if I had the choice. I call the donor my father, but my dad will always be the one who raised me and played with me and loved me, even though he died when I was young. He's the one that matters, but I am grateful to those who donate, enabling my father to have a child without a genetic illness. Donating is indeed a great thing to do for people who can't or don't feel they should have genetic offspring for a variety of reasons, even if the donor's decision is purely financial or they don't wish to be contacted later. And yes, we do have to respect their rights to privacy after the fact. They entered into this under an understanding of certain conditions and would probably jump on an ancestry site if they ever really got curious. Somewhat related, but I've got a brother from another mother and a happy story to share. My dad had a kid with a lady in the 80s. She didn't want to keep it and he didn't want to be a single dad, so he was put up for adoption and they split up and went about their days. There's likely a lot more to the story than that, but I've only ever been told my dad's side, so I'll leave it there. Fast forward 30 years, my dad has settled down and now has a family of 5 kids with my mum. He gets a call from a non-profit asking if he'd provide his information if his kid wants to reach out. He does and goes about his day. Fast forward a few months and he gets a call from his son, initially wanting to learn about possible health causes and curiosity. He ended up getting adopted by an amazing family and doing very well for himself. He wants to come to town and meet my dad. Dad has 5 awkward conversations with his kids, explaining we had another brother and that brother was coming up to visit. Note, a running insult when we were growing up was calling each other adopted, which annoyed my dad a lot. Fast forward 2 weeks, there was a graduation this weekend and we were having all the family over, so it was a good time for him to come up and meet the guy. Great person, we all hit it off and we're still close with all the brothers. Everything worked out pretty good, all things considered. He's the spitting image of my dad and a really great friend. His parents are amazing people as well. Really lucky to have him in my life. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Mine may seem awkward. My mum's friend's a lesbian. 10 years ago, all 3 came up to me and asked if I would donate. Why the hell not? Lovely people and desperate to be parents. After the second turkey baster insemination, they got pregnant. They have a beautiful little girl. I went on to have my own 2 daughters, and they then came up to me 2 years ago and asked again. This time it was a bigger decision, but my partner knew the full story and was more than happy to allow us to try a second time, which was again successful. They had a boy this time. We've spoken extensively and we've all got no issue with them knowing that I'm the donor. My kids will also know when the time comes. We agreed that we'd run off the whole I have no input other than biological thing, and obviously we won't be able to stop the whole who's my father conversation, but we've agreed that when the time does come, they'll be sat down with my own 2 children as well, and have the explanation that I'm not a father to them and that it was purely to allow them to have children and that they aren't missing out by having 2 mums rather than a mum and dad. It's hard to type out, but I'm sure you guys will get it. Thankfully, they look nothing like my own children. That could be awkward considering we live in the same neighborhood. Also, I have no attachment or need to be anything to these kids. That might seem horrible to say, but this was my gift to 2 amazing parents and they're doing fantastic. I don't need to be there for them. I'm just helping 2 people live the best life they can. I'm a simple man. If I can help someone, I will. Life's difficult as it is. People do good things to help me, and I do the same for others. We should all be helping each other when we can, no matter how big or small the gesture. I was approached by my longtime childhood friend and asked if I would be a donor for her and her wife. I agreed, and they asked if I'd be okay with being in their life, to take pictures and be around so the child knows who I am, and knows I'm a friend and also knows that I'm the biological donor, just so that there's no questions down the road. I agreed, and it's been awesome so far. He just turned 2 and he's a tornado. I warned them, by the way. But he's loved more than most children will ever be. Coming from a background in psych, I figured developmentally it would be easier to be labeled as a friend and not an unknown. Questions of turmoil of where did I come from and stuff, I guess we'll see. I was a donor, and when this happened to me, it was okay. 4 separate offspring at various times over the course of about 6 months contacted me, all just as they turned 18, and records were open to them. It was cool for me to see pictures of them and how much they looked like me. It was also good to hear the stories from their parents of how I helped them conceive a much-needed child, which I really appreciated. But that was all. A few nice, polite emails were exchanged, some kindnesses, and then we stopped emailing. I didn't want or expect more, I'm just glad to know that they existed and they got to connect with their biological heritage. I supposedly, as far as the donor system estimates, have a lot more out there. But I expect that these are the only ones that will contact me, since I assume most of them will want to do it as soon as they can, and all of my donations happened within an 18-month span. A few emails probably meant a lot to them. It showed that you cared, but ultimately recognized that you weren't their dad. I emailed my donor at 18, sent a little biography and some pictures, and said I understood he wasn't my dad, and he responded with, "Yeah, never contact me again, I haven't told my wife and kids," and attached the worst, most faraway picture of himself that he could. There are at least 18 of us kids, and most of us know each other. And the ones of us who were interested in reaching out, maybe 5 or 6 of us, were super disappointed that he was so rude. So from a donor kid, thanks for being kind. You would really be surprised by how much genes incorporate into your lifestyle and even mannerisms. I met my biological father when I was 25 after never meeting or seeing him my whole life. The little things were so weird. We sat in a chair the same way, we nervously bit the skin next to our fingernails at the same time. The first drink I ever ordered was a White Russian because I thought it was interesting. Lo and behold, when we met him and his family, they brought White Russians to the lake because it's their favorite drink. I've kept a $2 bill in my wallet since I was 14 for no reason at all. After we talked, it turned out he had a $2 bill in his wallet since he was a kid as well. Just really weird things as coincidences. I learned in my 30s my brother and I were donor conceived via the same donor. Before I even met him, seeing his Facebook pictures blew my mind. I'd never really resembled anyone in my family who raised me. My brother looks a lot like my mother, and I figured I must take after my older ancestors. When I found my biological dad's profile, I saw my face staring back at me. And when I met him, I learned he shares some of the same hobbies as us that were never explored with our social family. The seed is strong for some of them out there, I guess. The real breathtaking one for me is just how many seemingly random quirks that first account named that seemed to come from biological tendencies. Fascinating. Donor for lesbian friends. Their son doesn't know yet, but knows I'm his godfather. It isn't something that they'll keep from him, though, when he eventually asks. A lesbian couple I was friends with wanted a baby, but all the donors they met were buttholes. In the end, I said, "If you want my baby gravy, I'm fine with that. You guys know me well enough, and it's not like I want kids, so you might as well." They wanted to pay me, so I just said, "Put £10 into the tank of my car and buy me a bag of chips." Strangely, the wee boy was born on my birthday. So that's my dad's girlfriend, me, and this kid all born on the same day. One of my good friends was a donor child. Her parents gave her full permission and access to the donor's information as he consented, but she never cared to meet him or contact him. She'd say something along the lines of, "Apart from his biological role, he has nothing to do with my life." The family had his medical history prior to the procedure to ensure no complications. So, not exactly what you'd consider a donor, but I got an ex-prego, and she never told me. 10 years later, I do a 23andMe DNA test, and now I have a 10-year-old daughter. Scary, but I think it worked out in the best way possible. Also, just for fun, I also donated to a lesbian couple, so I now have 2 contributions to this group. 2 kids under very different circumstances, but they're both taken care of by their own families. I have a friend who was raised by 2 lesbians, but conceived by a turkey-baster party, which, if you didn't know what that is, I didn't either. Apparently, sometime in the early 80s, a bunch of LGBTQ folk wanting kids all met somewhere in a New York apartment. The men, as there were multiple, all splooged into a receptacle of some kind, and that product was then inserted via turkey baster into one of the female partners with the hope that they'd get preggo. His mum used to share this story with us, a lot, while under the influence as we grew up. At some point, when he hit about 23-ish, he did in fact attempt to find his bio dad. because he needed to know some things about his genetic health that could really only be answered if he knew the other half. And what we came to was essentially a who knows, thanks to this. Apparently, it would have been very possible to maybe get a genetics test, but also apparently at that point in history at least, it was a very good chance that that incredibly expensive route wouldn't lead anywhere. So he's fine with just not knowing, at least last time I heard from him. Basically, I'd just graduated college, my girlfriend and I needed some extra cash, and I said, well, this is a cool idea. I've always wanted kids, and my girlfriend can no longer have bio kids due to bad endometriosis tearing up her uterus. From a purely biological perspective, I think it was kind of neat that my genes are out there in the world possibly. As for why I said it was fine to contact me, I figured at that point it's up to the kid if they want any kind of relationship, and it would suck to know that someone could knowingly help create you and not only want nothing to do with you, but actively prevent you from learning about them. Anyways, this was about 8 years ago, so remind me in 10 years and I'll let you know if this comes up. By the way, I do have a son. He's not biologically mine, but I still love his adorable butt. My wife had fertility issues and we looked at receiving a donor egg. When one was lined up, I felt the need to donate my own swimmers as a way of paying it forward. But then my wife became pregnant with her own egg. I feel like our good karma paid off, and our only child will have half-siblings. I regret it, deeply. I'm in my 20s. A family friend had been trying to get pregnant for some time, but was having difficulty as she was single and in her late 30s. Had a good job and everything, but it's a small town and she's not very outgoing. But she desperately wanted a child. So, after a few years of watching her try and fail, I offered to help. Turns out my stuff was pretty potent, and she was shortly after pregnant. What I failed to take into account was that this would also be my first child. But not my child. And as a close family friend, the infant is over at my parents' house being babysat pretty much every day. My immediate family are the only people who know. Her family and the rest of the world are unaware and believe it to be an unknown donor. It was clear from the start that I would never be known as the father to the kid, and I told her I didn't mind either way she wanted to do it. So now here I am, still getting used to it and realizing I've done something I'll regret for the rest of my life, but that's undoubtedly the best thing I've ever done for someone else. Ask some Europeans. Even without permission, kids now have a right to contact their biological fathers due to a new law from 2018. Even if the donators strictly refused this option. A family member of mine did this but didn't give any permissions. A bio child, now an adult, was able to figure out who he most likely was based on genealogy websites, and the child reached out to me since his family member doesn't have a social media presence. I believe he's since contacted the bio child, but the concern isn't this one person, but that it could be many, many potential bio children in the world out there somewhere. On the bio child's part, they now live on a different continent and appear to be a happy, functional adult who understands the awkwardness of the situation, but simply wants to know more about their biological family. What did your family do that you later realized was completely unhinged? When my mother left my dad, she pitched a tent in my walk-in closet. I was 7 or 8 and she lived in my fricking closet for months before she got her own place. I still remember her reading her Joyce Meyer books by lamplight. She couldn't stand to sleep in the same bed with him, but couldn't afford to leave, so she'd rather live in a closet. Damn. They kept everything. Everything. The moment I walked into my friend's house and realized you're not supposed to have stuff lining the walls was ridiculous. They let homeless punk rockers live with us, several of them, and some of them slept in our beds with us, with her permission. My mum was always very interested in our romantic lives, partly because that was an area where we didn't stack up as well compared to our cousins. The most insane manifestation of this was when I agreed to go out on a date with a guy, only to find out before the date that he was a predator who'd been fired or arrested after he made moves on 4 separate freshmen at the school where he taught. My mum flipped out, trying to convince me not to cancel the date. He might have grown out of it, you don't know if you don't give him a chance. Thankfully, my dad was on my side and I cancelled the date. My mum sulked the rest of the night and demanded I log her into my Facebook account so she could scroll through my friend list so that she could see which of my male friends were straight and single so she could push me towards them instead. I now have my own place and peace and solitude and no preverts in my life. I had no restrictions on food or drinks, and from the time I was 4 or 5, I was drinking around 5 cans of Dr. Pepper a day. My parents never told me I needed to drink water, and real juice was never in the house. Juice when I was little was Hawaiian Punch or the 5% Juice Minute Maid Fruit Punch. Lunches during the summer was a continuous cycle of pizza rolls, SpaghettiOs, and McDonald's. Breakfast was either chocolate Pop-Tarts or Fruity Pebbles cereal. Now, I don't think junk food now and then is too much, but I don't think I had a single day in my childhood where I wasn't given sweets, fatty snacks, or caffeine. The funny thing is, as a kid, I used to think it was my friends' parents who were the odd, mean ones for only letting their kids have things like sodas on rare occasions. Looking back, I speculate that along with just being lazy, it was also probably my parents' way of trying to make me happy and make up for the lack of time spent with me by buying me whatever junk food I wanted. Yeah, I mean, it's good to acknowledge that this bad parenting still likely came from a place of love, but you still owe it to your kids to set them up for success and later life in all things, including their diet. It's so important for their senses of boundaries and their attention span at school, to say nothing of their damn health. At least it seems like you got out okay on the other end. I don't have very many memories of my childhood, or really anything in the last 25 years. But I do remember when we'd go in timeout, we'd have to bend our knees and fold our arms behind our backs while staring at the wall. We had to stand motionless and silent for 30 minutes. If we moved or swayed, we got another 30 minutes. This would go on for hours sometimes. My brothers and I would pull muscles and pass out at times. Also, while we were in the shower, our parents would search our rooms. They did this every day, and if they found anything they didn't like, they'd make us jump out of the shower, still dripping wet and undressed, and come clean or explain whatever they found. And we were always grounded, but they would never tell us why. So since we were already grounded, they'd just take away our birthdays or do timeout for punishment. I've only celebrated my birthday twice in my life, and both times my mum shut it down within 10 minutes. In short, leg day all day. I can do squats for hours. Alright, I'll answer some of the questions that are coming up. To those who don't believe, that's fine. I don't need you to believe me. I know what I went through and I don't need to prove it to anyone. My birthday is March 30th. I'm a 25-year-old woman. I live in Omaha, Nebraska in the United States with my boyfriend and 6 cats. Not with my parents. They kicked me out a week before my 18th birthday. My family is mixed race, but predominantly white. My mum claims to be Wiccan and Christian at the same time. My father is a Mormon. Kind of. He's crystal addicted and schizophrenic and a vagrant that used to be Mormon. The values I brought up under are mostly Mormon. My parents divorced and both remarried. They both admitted that they should never have had kids, and myself and siblings all agree. My mother is a narcissist who always needs to be the center of attention. She managed to make my grandfather's death all about her. And I just found out my grandmother is going into hospice care this weekend. My mother never even once mentioned that she was sick, and she's a POA. I've been able to cope with everything by disassociating and repressing. Also, I just joke about the crap that happened to me. It really helps me work through it. I'll say something that was traumatic with a huge smile on my face and then just do finger guns and walk away. It's really cathartic. I have one coworker who I think gets it and he just does it right back like it's no big deal. He jokes that I must be cursed and that my life is the perfect example of Murphy's Law. I have new memories pop up all the time. Sometimes random things bring them up. I actually had one pop up this morning. I smelled Dial Gold hand soap. I've always hated the smell of it, and it makes me gag. A memory popped into my head of being held down and having soap pumped into my mouth. That was another one of my mum's genius punishments. I ended up hurling up and then was punished for that with the bent knee timeout. I mean, I think I'm okay? I don't really know. I've always had a lot of anxiety, yet I'm essentially devoid of emotion. I guess I'm 97% okay and 3% very not okay. I don't know. My grandpa would pick up my mum and aunt from elementary school and race the train every time. My mum was scared shirtless and my aunt was cheering him on to go faster. My mum once blew out the pilot lights on our gas stove, cranked up the gas, and told 7-year-old me and my 14-year-old sister just to go to sleep. I went to bed not knowing any better. Luckily, my sister dragged me out of the house and we sat in the car. My mum finally changed her mind and sobered up a bit and aired out the house, relit the pilots, and took us back inside. So, that was fun. My brother, while raising his boys, would buy like 10 gallons of milk at a time while it was on sale and then put it in the deep freezer. It never tasted like milk after it thawed. He claimed to not have noticed a difference. Oh, there's a difference all right. I was a kid and I had no idea that this gross taste would be eliminated or rectified, I guess, by shaking the milk. Man, I bet my nephews wish they could have known that. We live on a farm in the middle of nowhere, at least 35 minutes to the nearest grocery store. I'm not sure how it started because I was a kid, but anytime our puppy dog howled, we'd all howl, to the point that it was a deafening sound and would make our ears rattle a bit. His name was Duke. I'd occasionally howl first because then he'd follow, and then so would my mother, father, and 2 older brothers. I thought it was awesome and fun, and it felt invigorating to do. I now realize this is slightly unusual behavior. My godbrother's parents used to lock us in his room for hours to days at a time. His little brothers learned to pee in the trash can instead of on the floor when we couldn't get them out. We eventually learned how to unlock and relock the hatch from inside the room so that the 4 of us could get out for pee breaks and for snacks when we were feeling really courageous. I didn't realize how abnormal this was until I was watching a news story in the work break room with a bunch of co-workers about a neglected child being removed from an unfit home. My initial response was, that's nothing. As I launched into what I just wrote above, I looked around waiting for everyone else's stories, but instead they all just stared at me. Quite a few people have been very kind and offered sound advice to me. Therapy is definitely worth its weight in gold. I have a brother with disabilities. He's relatively low-functioning and requires regular attention, both inside the home and out. I love him to death, but it made for a pretty untraditional childhood. I didn't realize until my late teenage years that other families were happy and relaxed, which isn't to say they didn't have their problems, just that they weren't constantly preoccupied by one family member who requires more care and attention than the others, at all times. And to be clear, my brother is a wonderful person. I cherish every moment that I get to spend with him now, but at the same time, I spend a disproportionate amount of my childhood in waiting rooms while he went to various therapies. I spent very little time with my parents growing up because of all their attention being focused on my brother. I was an afterthought because I was lucky enough to be an afterthought and still function. My parents visited underground Atlanta back in the early 90s. Not the safest place. Anyways, my brother was a baby and crawled under a bench they were sitting on. He pulled out an umbrella bag with a very sinister knife inside. My parents don't report the knife or anything, but instead keep it and it becomes a staple knife in our kitchen. So, yeah, pretty sure my parents used a murder weapon to cut the crust off our PB&J. I wonder if there are important fingerprints on that umbrella bag to this day. I wouldn't be surprised if your parents had kept that as well, so you never know. The knife has probably been through the dishwasher a couple of times by now, sadly. My alcoholic, bipolar father would drop me and my 2 siblings off at the grocery store with his credit card and tell us to go grocery shopping. We were young kids when this started. He'd either go and hit up a bar or wait in the parking lot before coming back to get us. Sometimes it would be a very long wait. Looking back, I still don't know how we were able to run his credit card and nobody ever batted an eye. We had to cook too, so it wasn't exactly healthy stuff. A lot of the times, the food would all be gone a week or so before he'd take us back to the store. So we had to get really creative. We'd joke that there was nothing left but the goo in the back of the refrigerator. Honestly, I'm surprised we didn't develop diabetes, although I am hypoglycemic, or obesity or anything serious. We quickly learned not to buy a bunch of candy or sweets, something that kind of impresses me looking back. I learned to keep an emergency stash of food hidden in my room. One of many insane things, but that's the first that comes to mind. When I was in 6th grade, I think, my mum decided we needed to understand what it was like for people in third world countries. We ate oatmeal for breakfast, beans and rice for lunch, we could have 1 fruit for a snack, and beans and rice plus some romaine lettuce for dinner. All of this for a month, and we were only allowed 3 cheat meals. In high school, looking back, I just thought she was bat crap crazy. But once I started having bills and such of my own, it occurred to me my parents were just that broke. They just didn't want us to realize and worry. Damn, do I love those 2 people. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. On the day my dad decided to buy our family's first PC, he loaded me and my younger sisters into the back of our little 2-door Honda and drove the 20 minutes to the store. After purchasing the computer, my dad realized there wasn't enough room in our tiny car for 3 children, car seats, and a giant 1997 computer. So he left us at the store, apparently thinking that if he bought us all candy bars, that would be enough to keep a 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and 2-year-old occupied and out of trouble. He took the new computer home and then turned around to come back and get us, having left us alone for easily 40 minutes. My mum found out about all of this a year ago when my dad casually told the story over dinner. My dad once took 3 of us kids out for a ride in the Pine Barrens. He drove us 20 minutes into the woods on a sandy trail in a minivan. He had just gotten into a fight with my stepmother and needed a drive to burn off all the alcohol in his system. He didn't say much during the ride. We got stuck, obviously because we were in a two-wheel drive camper van, but luckily some four-wheel drive truck dude came through and winched us out. When that guy showed up, my dad wasn't quiet anymore, and we left the woods when we were unstuck and we went home. I'm not sure what his intentions were that day, but the look on my stepmother's face when we returned made me rethink whether it was a fun ride in the woods or a screw-this-life moment worthy of the nightly news, narrowly averted. To answer a few questions, my dad's been dead for 7 years, so we don't really talk much anymore. It wasn't unusual for him to go out for a ride after a drunken fight, but it was the only time he took some of his kids with him. I'm guessing that's what made my stepmother so upset. As a young kid with a drunk for a dad, I never really thought about him purposefully ending us. He was an angry drunk, but it was mostly just verbal. At that point, I'd never been off-roading in the woods, so I was more focused on the scenery than the purpose or possible outcome of the ride. Like a lot of things from childhood, I didn't realize some of the severities of the situation until I was much older. My mother is very controlling. She would make me turn my diary over to make sure I wasn't writing anything that she didn't approve of. So I saved up enough money by skipping school lunch and bought a secret diary at the book fair. I came home to her sitting on my bed and yelling at me for writing "Mum is a jerk" or something like that. She would have grounded me, but I wasn't allowed out of the house without her escorting me until the age of 16 anyway. She then wondered why I had no friends. I was only allowed 30 minutes on the computer in the computer room, and I'd have to record which websites I went on and what usernames and passwords I used. She'd use the password book to go on the websites and look at who I was talking to. I also just kind of accepted that it was normal for parents to charge rent when you turn 18 and only allow you to eat one meal a day, dinner, and to have to pay for the others yourself. The rent thing doesn't bother me as much. It started out as $500 a month and went up every year, so now I'm at $700 a month. That's pretty normal rent around where I live, and I don't have to pay for heat or internet or stuff. I'm trying to move out, but I also have to pay for college out of pocket, and it all adds up. My folks got into a screaming argument where they ended up throwing dishes at each other's heads, fairly frequently. Oh wow, they're really mad right now. Better play some Nintendo until this blows over. You know, it wasn't until later in life that my sister and I said, "Wait a second, what the frick?" When we were young, my father smoked a lot, and when we were with him during the day and said we were hungry, he'd give us each a packet of matches. We'd eat them and then be good. No, we weren't poor, we just had lazy and crazy parents. I used to babysit my parents' friends' kids occasionally. After I babysat 2 kids that were 4 and 6, my mum said her friend was happy and I did a good job. I was 13. Then she mentioned that that was good because her friend was distrustful of babysitters since her other 2 kids had drowned while under a babysitter's supervision. I thought that was slightly odd. No helicoptering in the 80s. Oh, fend for yourself night. When I was like 5 and onwards, we'd have to find our own food that night. I later found out my parents were too lazy to cook for my sister and I, who were only 5 and 8. I used to come up with really weird food combinations, most notably Nutella or peanut butter and candy sprinkles wrapped up in a tortilla. As I got older, I began toasting it and rolling it in cinnamon sugar. And wow, people are either going, "Same, dude," or "My God, how could a parent do something like this to a 5-year-old?" I feel a little better knowing that there's more of us. And to clarify, this happening once a week or something isn't really an issue. With me, it gradually went from like twice a week to every other day. Eventually, growing up, my parents just stopped cooking, and if they did, it was suddenly a huge deal. Like they'd cook once a week at the most. Really chaotic stuff. I became the best improv chef ever, so I'm thankful. But at the same time, Jesus Christ, I mean, my sister became a pre-diabetic at age 12 over the lack of nutrition. We didn't know any better, unfortunately. One of the winter chores was to clear old trees in an area that eventually became fields. Now imagine, if you will, being hoisted up to a knot on top of a tree 30 feet in the air on the front-end loader of a tractor so that you could dump in a mixture of oil and gas and chucking a match in the hole. The explosion being enough to rock the loader back and forth, my father ran the tractor while I firebombed the tree. When those trees did come down, we'd haul them off with the tractor while chained up. I'd ride in the outer branches to where we were hauling these old-growth cottonwood trees that were massive and sometimes tipped. More than once I got caught up under these trees as they rolled, but luckily I never got more than a few scrapes. Well, yes, this is child endangerment. But the more I think about certain other farm jobs, this sounds a lot less dangerous than being one of those kids who rides around everywhere on a quad bike or ATV, which happened a lot on the farms I grew up next to. And that aside, I think at least the first few times doing this as a kid would be the coolest thing in the world. All of my friends would be hearing about this. My mother sends her professional emails in Comic Sans. My mother refused to take me to the emergency room growing up. She took my stepdad and my stepsister, but refused to take me. I've got permanent damage to my ankle thanks to her refusing to take me there. Thanks, Mum. I live in the UK for reference, so it wasn't like we couldn't afford it. Throughout my childhood, I'd end up being my dad's therapist. He'd often tell me he sometimes wished he could go to sleep and never wake up. That's a bit heavy for a 12-year-old to hear from their parent. After I became a teen and could drive, he'd call me in the middle of the night while I was at my mum's house and ask me to rush over because he was sick and needed help. I spent a lot of nights feeding him Jell-O and sitting awake in his room so he could sleep because his meds would make him hallucinate and he'd think demons were going to kill him in his sleep. It wasn't until I was older that I realized I missed a lot of my childhood because I had to parent him instead of the other way round. Eventually, he found a wife who took care of him and cut me out of his life. Apparently, he tells her stories about how I never spend time with him and has never cared because she sends me rants about how awful I am. Mine's pretty simple. We didn't have money for food when I was a kid. My mum was too embarrassed to apply for food stamps, so we just went without. But my parents had no issues buying food only for themselves and refusing to let us have any, including hiding them on high shelves so we couldn't sneak into it. They'd eat in front of my sister and I while we sat and glared. They'd get mad and give us each a bite and then make us go to our rooms. There would be nothing else in the house to eat and it didn't matter. As a kid, it sucked, but your parents know what they're doing, right? As an adult and a parent myself, it's batcrap crazy now. I could never sit there and eat while my son went hungry. It came out later that my mum was an addict, narcotics and booze, and my dad was more interested in doing it with any girl who'd have him than raising the consequences of doing that. So yeah, they aren't a part of my life anymore. My in-laws, well, mostly my now-deceased mother-in-law and a brother-in-law, swear by trunk food. What is trunk food? It is food that you make and sometimes cook, sometimes not, and when you go on a road trip, you wrap it in foil and throw it in the truck with the spare tire and everything else gross back there. This is only done for long-distance trips. When you arrive at your destination, you eat the food. Mother-in-law and brother-in-law swore that it made the food taste better. If the food was uncooked, the idea was that being in a hot trunk for several hours would cook it to the desired temperature. In theory, the cakes were probably the safest. She'd make small individual spice cake loaves and wrap them up, and then you would have spice cake with the gentle aroma of car exhaust. She once made an entire birthday cake for me in the same way, except that it was left in the pan and had icing, and minimal wrapping. I ate a slice to be polite, but I was being very polite. I didn't eat the rest. My brother-in-law is the worst, though. He is Orthodox Jewish and keeps kosher, which is very problematic when traveling long distances, so he's used to having to pack food with him. They used to live in South Carolina, and he was driving to Miami to catch a flight to Israel a few times before he actually emigrated there. We live in Central Florida and offered to prepare him some kosher food, but he wasn't having any of that and he bought his own meatloaf out of the trunk of a very hot car on a hot summer day. He wanted to share it with us, but I have this thing about food poisoning, so I didn't eat it. You can only be so polite. Mother-in-law has passed away, and the brother-in-law now lives in Israel, so no more trunk food in my life. My husband, the twin of the brother-in-law, has working brain cells and believes strongly in food safety. Thank goodness.